In this video tutorial, you'll learn how to build a complete web application from start to finish using some of the latest and most powerful modern web development techniques. You'll start by setting up your development environment and creating a Next.js project. From there, you'll build out the front end of the application using TailwindUI. Next, what we'll do is we'll be working with a database, so that will be Firebase with the latest version of version 9, which will allow you to add real-time functionality and data storage to your application. You'll use Cloud Firestore to store and retrieve data, Firebase Authentication to handle user authentication and authorization, and finally Firebase Storage to handle file uploads and downloads. Throughout the tutorial, you'll learn how to use TypeScript to write more maintainables and scalable code. By the end of this tutorial, you'll have built a fully functional WhatsApp clone that you can use as a starting point for your own web development projects. So let's get started with the build. Okay, so this is what you will achieve in the WhatsApp build. So when we get into the app, we get to the login page. We can sign in using the Google authentication. So if we click sign into Google, this then logs you in with your Google account that you are currently logged in with. And then what will happen is you will get directed to the homepage. And as you can see here, we have our homepage here with our default UI. We have the icon showing for our Google login here. We have a list of all of our chats going down here. These chats are using the new Next.js 13 data fetching method where we can fetch on the server side. And then this is basically a chat coming from the Firestore database. So if we click through to here, this is our conversation. So we have our recipient details in here, and also in the sidebar we have our chats with messages in here, and we also have the image being fetched down from our Firebase storage. We can also upload images where we have a modal with material UI here, and we also have another modal which is showing the list of all of our contacts. We have the delete functionality, so we can delete this chat from the Firestore database, and we can also sign out as well. So let's get started with the build. Okay, so let's get started with the project. If you can see here on the screen, it's got installation steps following this URL on the Next.js docs. First of all, what I want to do though is create a new repository in my GitHub. So the project is going to be called Next13 WhatsApp-YT for a YouTube project. I'm going to keep it as public and then just create the repository here. So now I've got the link here that I want to clone onto my local machine. So if I go into my terminal, here, I just want to type in git clone and paste in that URL that we have created for the new repository. And if you press enter there, then I want to see the folder structure. So you type in ls here, and then you can see all of my builds in here. I want to navigate to this one, which is Next13 WhatsApp. So all I want to do is cd and Next13 WhatsApp-YT, like so. And then all I want to do is code space dot. And then this will open up VS Code for me here. So now you can see Next13-WhatsApp-YT. So what I can do now is expand this. So now if I open the terminal in here, what I now want to do is go back into the Next.js docs and then copy this link here. And if you go back and paste that in the terminal. So now this will start creating the Next.js project. I'm just going to call this my app, but we will just move it into this folder that we have just created. We want to use TypeScript, so we press enter, and ESLint, so press enter. We are going to be using Tailwind, so we are going to press enter there. And would you like a source directory? We are not going to have that in this project. And we are using the app router, so it's Next.js 13. And then I'm just going to press no again. So essentially what I've done is followed the recommended step from Next.js, and then that is all installing in here now. What I also want to do is open a new terminal and type in node-v and press enter. So at the minute, I'm using Node version 14.19. So we want to change that. So the way to change that is using a package called NVM, which you need to download and install. I already have it installed in my project. So what I'm going to do is type in nvm use, and the version I'm going to use is 18.12.1. So I'm going to press enter, and that will change the version for me. If we just check the version again this time, you can see now I'm using 18.12.1. This is important because we need that in our Next.js 13 project. As you can see here, it says 16.8 or later. So I'm using the 18 version. So if we go back, we're going to delete this terminal now. And then this is installing everything in my app, as you can see there. So we just need to wait for it to complete. So now that's everything complete. What I want to do is I want to take everything out of my app. So if I click here and then press shift and click again, I can just move everything out of here, and then I can just delete the my app folder. So let's delete that. So essentially, the project will fall in the next 13 WhatsApp YT. So if we navigate through this, there's a few differences in Next.js 13 as opposed to Next.js 12. So if we expand the app directory, we have a few files in here. We have the global CSS, which imports all of the Tailwind styles because we are using that. So we don't really need to mess with this one. We have a layout.tsx in here. So this is the root layout component. What this essentially does is it has HTML here, and then it also has a body tag here with the class name of inter.classname, which essentially is importing the relevant font. So this is how you would import a font from Next.js. There's a little difference here as well, which is the metadata, which is the site metadata. So because this layout is across, what you could do is instead of create next app, we want to change this to WhatsApp clone with Next.js 13. And then everything essentially in here is a wrapper to the rest of the application. So that's why we bring in children as props, which then renders out the children. So essentially the rest of the app in here. So that will be the home page. We will have a chat page and also a login page. So going on to the home page, this is the page here. We have our default boilerplate code in here, but what I want to do is close this down. We don't need the divs that are the imported ones from Next 13. So let's delete everything that we don't need. So now that everything is deleted, I also want to, first of all, delete the class name in here because we want to change this, and I'm going to leave it as it is now for now. And in here, I'm just going to type in a h1 saying WhatsApp clone. So now if I save that, what I want to do is we've now checked the layout, which is the wrapper around the app. We've now got the page, which is the slash route on the app, which is essentially the home page. So now if I go into my terminal, I first of all want to check if it is installed. So I'm just going to use yarn in this build. So if we delete the package lock here, and then I'm just going to type in yarn, which will install the relevant dependencies and create a yarn lock file for me. Okay, so now that I have my yarn lock file here, what I want to do now is do yarn run dev to run the application. And essentially we should see everything working with a h1 of WhatsApp clone. So if I go into my browser onto localhost here, you can see here it says WhatsApp clone. So we need to fix the styling and so on. So let's go ahead and do that. So first of all, in the WhatsApp menu, what we have is a sidebar on the left and we have a main screen. So essentially I'm going to have two columns. The first column is going to be a chat sidebar, and then the second column is going to be the main screen. So that will show the chat, but on the home page, we will just have an image being rendered. So what we first of all need is a display of flex. So in Tailwind, it is flex like so. And then we want to do a height of the screen. So take up the entire screen. So essentially height of 100 VH. And then what we also want to do is have a whole overflow of hidden. So that is the first style there complete. We then want two divs. So in the first div, we want to render a chat sidebar. So let's just keep that as it is for now. And then the second div, we want to have a main chat like so. So if we save, we can see now we have a chat sidebar, and then straight after we have a chat. So we need to style that as well. So first div is going to be a class name, and in here we are going to have a background of white, so bg white of 500, which is essentially the shade of the white that we want. You could go up to, I think it's 700 or maybe 900, but you can check in the Tailwind docs. This column is going to have a width of a third of the screen, so 1/3. Essentially that means take up a third of the screen on the left, and then everything else will be the chat on the right. And then we also want a overflow Y of auto. So this vertical axis will be scrollable for all our chats if there are any other chats that we need to see and it's overflowing. So now if I save that and go into here, you can see now it's taking up a third of the screen there. And we also need to do the same for the chat. So let's style the chat now. So class name, and this time the chat will be a width of full, meaning take up the rest of the space. Again, this is going to have an overflow Y of auto as well. This is going to be a display of flex. We are going to have the justify items as center. So I'll align items of center in normal CSS. I'll justify content of center, which is justify center in Tailwind. And then this one is going to be a background of blue, and this shade is going to be 50, so just a light blue. So now if I save, you can see it coming together. You can see the difference between the two. Now we have this column, which is the sidebar, and then this is the main chat screen here. So what I now want to do is bring in the image that we will be rendering. So let me just bring that in, which is essentially the WhatsApp background. So if I put that in public, just there, so this is going to be rendered onto the home screen when we are on the home page, but when we get into a chat page, then this will disappear and then we will have the individual chat being rendered. So back onto the page here, what I'm going to do is render a next image, which is coming from Next.js, and this is an image tag I've talked about in my other builds in here. So essentially the source is going to be the WhatsApp PNG that we have. So I'm going to import this in first of all. So import, and I'm going to call this background image from /public of WhatsApp background PNG, like so. I'm going to give this some alt text also, and then the width and the height I'm going to change to 1000. Now if I save and check the browser, you can see here there's an error saying background image not found, and that's because the name is whatsapp-bg.png. So let's rename that. And now, as you can see here, the background is showing up onto the page like so. What I'm going to do as well is max this image out so it's quite large, so it covers the entire screen, as you can see, like so there. So that's the main screen done. We just need to start creating the sidebar. So what I'm going to do first of all is create the folder structure for the project. We first of all have the app folder in here, and we have the public. If I click onto the package.json level, I'm going to create a new folder in here called modules, and I'm also going to create a new folder called components. So these are at the top level of the application. I'm also going to create a lib folder. So this is when we will integrate Firebase and any other third-party applications. They will go in the lib folder. That is everything now complete. What I first want to do is create a module. So in here, I'm going to create a new component called chat sidebar.tsx, and I'm going to do RAFCE like that and press tab, which is coming from React functional snippets, and this is going to be react.fc as a TypeScript functional component. And then in here we're just going to say h1, this is the sidebar. So now in my div up here, I'm going to render the chat sidebar component. So now if I save all, you can see that component is being rendered. So what we need to do is start creating that component. So in the chat sidebar component, we have a div first of all. So we need to style that. It's just going to be a width of full and a height of full, which means take up all the space that it can do. So that's that first part done. On WhatsApp, what we need to do is map out the things that we need. So we need a header at the top. We also need a search. We also want the archived, and we finally need the chat. So that's everything we need. The first component I'm going to build is the header. So I'm going to call this one sidebar header, because we will have a main screen header as well. So let's create this component. So in the folder for components, you can create a new folder in here. So this one is going to be called sidebar. So all the components for sidebar in here. And then I'm going to create a folder in here as well called sidebar header. And then in sidebar header, I'm going to create a index.tsx file in here. So if we create a functional component, or RAFCE, so again, instead of index, this time it's going to be called sidebar header, and this will be a react.fc for our type. And in here, I'm just going to render sidebar header like so. So now if I save, what I want to do is import this on our chat sidebar module. So that's imported in here. So as you have noticed, this is just a normal functional component as you would do in any Next.js project or React project. But what is happening is, by default, this is a server component. So what we want to do in this component is import a module for Material UI so we can access its icons, but that is done on the client side. So let's first of all open our terminal, and then we want to install Material UI. So let's install that. So if we close our project down for now and then go into our browser, and go into Material UI. So this is what we need for our project, for our icons. So if we go back in here, and instead of npm install, it is going to be yon add Material UI and all its dependencies. So that's that part sorted. And in the search, I want to also look for the icons. So Material icons in here. We need to copy this as well because we want to install the icons. And again, yarn add paste in the icons, but instead we don't want the npm install. So that is Material UI installed now. So what I want to do is give the class name for this div, and I'll explain it. So it's a display of flex, item, center, and justify content evenly. It's got a padding on the x-axis of the padding left and right of 0.5 rems, so px of 2, padding on the y-axis of 1 rem. It has a height of 5 rem, so h20, a border right on the sidebar here, which is also a gray of 200, and also a border bottom of gray of 200 as well. And then it finally has a z index of 10. So that means that the z index of the header will always be on top. So when we scroll the chats on the left hand side, the header will always be remaining. So if we save this and go into our application, nothing as of yet has changed because we need to import the sidebar header. So now if I save all, and then we can restart our app. So yarn run dev once again. And now you can see here that the sidebar header is now showing. We now need to insert the relevant icons. So they will be done from Material UI. So going back into our code, first of all, what I want to do is import the account circle icon from Material UI, which will be in its own standalone div. So again, let's create a div, and we want to import the account circle icon from Material UI, which is basically the icon for a person. And then if I save, what will happen is there will be an error that occurs. And if we go into here, as you can see here, create context only works in client components. Add the use client directive at the top of the file to use it. So essentially, because Next.js is server components first, what we need to do is whenever we use something to do with React, so a hook, so a use state hook or any sort of hook, we will need to import the use client directive at the top. So let's go ahead and do that right at the top of the page here. So essentially what this does is tells this Next.js app that this component in particular will be using the client side code. So Material UI imports our client side. So now if I save and go back in here, what will happen is now we have the icon imported. So now the app is working correctly. So the approach is server first, and then after that it will be the client, unless we direct it to say use client, then it would use the client. So now we have the account circle icon here imported. What I want to do is give this a class name because we want padding on the left this time. So class name and padding left of 2, which is PL, like so. So now if I save, you can see here padding left of 0.5 rem in here. Next off, what I want to do is have a few icons being imported in here like so. And the icons are going to be a group outlined icon, a data usage icon, a chat outlined icon, and that's everything here. So we just need to import this from Material UI. So again, let's go in and import the relevant ones at the top. Now everything is here. So if I now save and go into my browser, you can see now we have 4 icons in here, and when we click on them, that is the icon button showing the ripple effect as well. So now what I want to do is create a search component. So in Sidebar, I'm just going to create a new file, this deliver folder called search.tsx, like so, and I'm going to do refce, and this is the search, like so, and then react.fc, as I do with most of my components now. This is quite a simple component to make, so we just want some styling in here, which I will bring. This outer div will have a class name of display flex. It's going to be a position of sticky, top of 0, a background of white, justify content and the items, align item center, a px of 4, a height of 20, a width, meaning take the full width, a border bottom, and an overflow of hidden with the grey color again for the border. And then we're going to have a gap of 2 as well in here, which is 0.5 rem. What I'm also going to do is bring the rest of the component in here. So we essentially have a search icon that we are styling with the text of grey of 600 coming from Tailwind CSS. We have an input which has a class name of border none, which shows that it doesn't have a border, and an outline with a background of grey 200, and this is taking up the full width. Finally, what I want to do is import the relevant components from the Material UI. So because we're using Material UI, at the top here, we just need to import use client in here like so. So now if I save, what I also want to do is go into my chat sidebar module and then import the search component in here like so. So now that's imported. If we save all and then go into here, this will now refresh. And as you can see, we now have a search component being rendered with a filter list icon there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to also give this header a background of white. So if we go into sidebar header index like so, at the end of here, we have a BG of gray of 200. So I'm just going to change this to white. So now if I save, you can now see they are both looking fairly similar in here. So now finally what I want to do is stretch the search import to the end. So we want to make it a full width. So what I'm going to do is in this div here with the search icon and the import, I'm going to give this a width of full in here. So it will stretch it out. So let's check that out, which it has done. So now that is fine, and we can type in here as well, but the functionality will not be there. So what we want to do, because the functionality will not be there, we want to memoize this component, which means do not re-render it because it's a stateless component. So let's go ahead and do that. And the way to do that is just outside here, we could do react.memo, which means memoize this component. So we don't need to change it because it is stateless. And we can just wrap it around here instead of wrapping it around the entire component. We could do it here like that. So now if I save, essentially this is memoizing the component because nothing will change in this component in particular. So if we now type in here, it should not re-render anything. So next up is the archive, which is quite a simple component to make as well. It's similar to the search where it's going to be stateless. So let's go ahead and quickly make that one. I'm just going to bring it in from my finished build. So archived.tsx, which is going in the components sidebar folder. And if I just paste this in, essentially it's using client again because we are using the Material UI move to inbox icon. And this again is a react.fc. So at the moment, we are keeping things quite simple in this new Next.js 13 build. So it'll get more complicated shortly and we'll discover more functionality. So now all I need to do is import this from the relevant components file. And again, what I could do is wrap this in react.memo because it is a stateless component. And now if I save all, this will refresh and you can see here we have the archived as well just in here. So now what I want to do is go back into my chat sidebar. We can delete these comments now because we've done them. And next we want to move on to chat. So what I want to do is add a encrypted message as well. So let's bring that in, which shows at the bottom of every single chat, which is essentially just a p tag. I don't really want to focus on this, but your personal messages are end-to-end encrypted, which essentially is this piece of text here that will come after the chats. So now what we want to do is look at data fetching with Next.js. Okay, so now what I want to do is fetch the data for our users on the server side. I'm going to be using the dummy JSON API to first of all demonstrate how to fetch data on the server side in our home component. So at the top here, what I'm going to do is create a function called getUsers. So const getUsers is a async function. So this is where we fetch data, and I'm going to create a response. So we need to go into dummy JSON API, and I'm going to use the users essentially in here, which is dummy JSON /users like so. So quite simple. But if you first of all see the output, we get a list of all of these users in here that we are then going to render into our chat sidebar here. So there'll be a list down here. But eventually, when we build the app, we're going to be using Firebase to fetch our users that are authenticated with our login functionality. So back in here, if we change the URL on our fetch in the get users function, this URL should be put into an env file somewhere hidden, and then that way it protects it. But this is essentially backend code as well, so it's up to you how you want to do it, but I would recommend putting it in an env file. Moving forward, so previously there was a few ways of fetching the data, which was get server-side props, get static props, and get static paths. So I'm going to show you all three different ways of doing it. So first of all, we have our response in here, but I want to fetch, the first example will be getting static data, which is quite simple. It is await fetch here, and then we have a second argument like so, and it's going to be cache as the option, and we are going to have force cache, which means that this request will be cached until manually invalidated. It's similar to get static props, this example, and force cache is the default cache option, so it can be omitted, it can be changed. So let's do command and click through to cache in here, and the cache is optional, and it's the type of request cache, which is a union type. So you have force cache, default, no cache, no store, only if cached, and reload, so you can choose whichever one you want. And we also have other options like body, credentials, headers, and so on. You can read them more in the Next.js docs. So that is how to fetch static data. What I want to also show you is how to fetch dynamic data. So const dynamic data is again the same as this. So again, we're using the same URL, and then instead of force cache, this is going to be no store. So this time the dynamic data is similar to get server side props. This means that it will be refetched on every single request. It will then rebuild the page on the server and then deliver it into the client. And this is also good for SEO, because what will happen is Google will rebuild the page on the server, so then obviously web scrapers can see it as well. The final way to fetch data is the revalidate option. So this is where you could revalidate the cache every certain second. So in this case, it will be 10 seconds we're going to put it as. So const revalidated data is again equal to await fetch dummy JSON of users. And then this time I'm going to type in next, which essentially is true, but what I want to do is do revalidate this time, and I want to revalidate every 10 seconds. So this option means that the request should be cached with a lifetime of 10 seconds, and then every 10 seconds it will just revalidate the data and refetch the latest data from this API. So this revalidated data is similar to get static props with the revalidated option in here. So now I've shown you a few ways of fetching the data. So what I'm going to do now is create a constant of user data, which is equal to await. And in this case, I'm going to call the dynamic data .json in here like so. So this is the data I'm using, which with a cache of no store. So now if I hover over user data, nothing is declared. So what I've done is I've already created the type for this. So in package JSON here at that level, I'm going to create a types.d.ts, and then I'm just going to bring in the type for this data, which is the all users. So let's bring that in. And essentially this is the type for all users, and then we just need to implement that into our page. So user data is of type all users from app types in here. And then just to close this function off, I'm just going to finally return user data like so. So now we have access to this get users function. The difference would be now, instead of passing it down as props as you would do in Next.js, or instead of running a use effect as you would do in React, all I now need to do in here is get a constant. So const fetch users is equal to await, and this time I'm going to do await get users in here like so. And just finally, if you hover over it, await expressions are only allowed within async functions. So what you can do instead of export default function, we could do export default of async function in here. And now we have our fetch users on the page. So to prove and demonstrate that this works, if we do console log of fetched users, you will now see the console log being fetched on the server side, which means that this will show up in the terminal and not in the browser on the client. So if we save, as you can see here, there's an entire list of users being fetched. So now what we need to do is render out the relevant components, and we will do that next. Okay, so now that we are fetching the users from the dummy JSON API, what I now want to do is render the dummy JSON users into the chat sidebar. So we have the constant of fetch users in here. What I'm going to do is pass this down as props, and I'm going to call these props data of fetch users. So if we go into our chat sidebar component in here, I now want to create a type of props, and these props are going to go in here, and essentially it will be type props. And the props type in here is the data that we are receiving from the page component, and essentially it's the user type coming from dummy JSON API. So what I'm going to do is just bring in my types for that in here. So it is essentially the all user type that I'm going to call it. And if I bring that in and paste it in here, essentially there's quite a lot of strings and data that is coming from the dummy user. And if we call this all users type, we just need to import that in. And then I'm going to destructure the data because we need to use that now in here for our chats. And if we console log the data now, let's see what is being returned. So if we scroll all the way down, you can see here the data is undefined. That is because we need to save all of the pages because we are passing in the props from the page. So now you can see the data is being passed in. What we want is the object of users. So we need to destructure that. So let's go ahead and do that. So const the users is what we need to destructure from the data. So essentially destructuring is where we would pick out a certain thing from the data. So in our case, we want to pick out the users. So now in our chats under here, I want to do users.map. So we want to cycle through the users. And for each user, what I'm going to do is render a p-tag. And in here, I'm going to get the user.name. What I also want to do is add a closing parentheses in here. And there are a few TypeScript errors, but we will fix those in a moment. If we refresh the page, we aren't receiving any users come through here. So let's double check why that is. So if we hover over users, it says it does not exist on all users type. So it might be undefined. So what we want to do is add optional chaining in here to say if there are users, then we want to map through it. So let's double check that. And again, that's not working. So what we want to do now is console log users to see if users is pulling through like so. And then let's save and check the console. So the users are pulling through, which is fine. As you can see there, they are pulling through. So all I want to do is I want to do a check before we map over the users to say if there are users. So we want to use a double bang and users, which means that it will convert whatever users is into a Boolean value. So if users is true and users.map, then we want to map over it. And the user is going to be of type all users type. And then the data here is going to be changed. So if we go back into our page, you can see the data is of type all users. So that's the type we need to do in our data being passed down into the props. So let's change that like so. So that cleaned up that error. And then finally, it's missing a key prop. So P and the key is going to be the user.id. And then it says name does not exist. So let's do email instead. So now there are no errors in the code. And if we save all, we should now get the chats being rendered in here. So we are getting the emails pulled through. So now what I want to do is create a reusable chat component so we can render out the relevant chats instead of this here. So let's go ahead and render a chat which takes in a key first of all. So that is the user.id, each user, and then I want to pass in data. So the data this time will be the user. So essentially all of the user being spread across, and then we just need to close this component off. Now, if I save, we now need to create a chat component. So let's go in here in the sidebar and create a new file called chat.tsx. And this time we are receiving props. So it's going to be tsrafce and tab like so. And we are receiving the props. So the props is going to be the data that we pass in, but the data this time is going to be the all users type as an object because we are already mapping through it. So this chat is essentially the UI that we are going to be rendering on the chat sidebar. And what I'm going to do is just quickly refactor this a little bit. So this is react.fc. which is a functional component which will receive props. And then we want to destructure the data that we pass into here, like so. And then if we go into chat sidebar, we just need to quickly import this from our components. Now that is being handled on the chat sidebar side. We just need to render the chat. So if we first of all render a p tag, and in here it's going to be data.email, just to see that the emails are still passing through and rendering correctly. So as you can see now that the emails are pulling through and we are rendering it correctly. So we just need to style it out a little bit and make sure it works correctly. So in here, I'm going to style the div out first of all. So div will have a class name. It will be flex. So display of flex, items of center. We will have the justify between and a py of 4, a px of 6. This is going to have a bg of white for each chat, and then a border bottom, which is border dash b, and then we also are going to have a border of gray, which is the shade of 400. So that is that set. So let's check if that works. Now you can see each chat is being rendered, and you can see it's essentially scrolling as well, which is good. And at the bottom, you can see your personal messages are encrypted, so that's fine. We also need to add styling for when we hover over it. So let's go ahead and do that with Tailwind. So the way to do that is all you do is type in hover and then colon like so. This will have a BG of gray 200, an opacity of 80, an overflow of hidden, and finally a cursor pointer. So now if we save and hover over, we know which chat we are hovering over essentially. So that section is complete. Inside the outer div now, I'm going to have another div. So div in here, this will have a class name of flex and justify items from the start. Items center, so align item center, and then we are going to have a gap of 4, which means give it a gap for each of the children inside. So now if I move this p tag into here, and the first thing I want to render is a image component from next image, and then we can pass in the relevant details. So we have a source. So the source is going to be data.image. So the avatar is going to instead be a user, a width of 50 and a height of 50. We also have a class name of rounded full. So if we save, there is an error in here. So JSX element does not support attributes because it doesn't have a props property. So what we want to do now is essentially import the image component from next image, and that error will go away. And let's see what is rendering on the UI. So now it says here invalid source prop. Hostname robohash.org is not configured. So this is where we need to configure the next config.js. So let's go ahead and copy this URL first of all. So this is normal with Next.js. So if we go into nextconfig.js in here, I want to enhance the next config. So we need to define the next config first of all. And in here, we want the images. We want an images object, and you can have object of images with domains in here. So the URL that I've copied across, all I need to do now is paste that in as a string in here. And if there was more, you just do the same again and trail on from this. So now if I save all, what will happen now is I need to restart the application because I made changes to the next config. So if I do yarn run dev again, this error should now go away if we refresh the page. And as you can see now, we are getting our images being rendered on the page, which is correct and working fine. So now that that is working correctly, we can close this off. And then instead of data.email now, what I want to do is create a new div. And this div will have a class name. This is the text that's going to be on the right. And we are going to have flex col, which means display flex direction of column. And then we're going to have align items of start, which is item start. And then also justify of start. Then we're going to have a few p tags. So first p tag is going to be the data.firstname, which comes from the data that we are receiving from the props. The second thing we need is a p tag again. And for now, I'm just going to put in this is the message body as text because we don't have any messages coming from this API. So now if I save that, let's check that works, which it does do. And then I also want to add some styling in here. So the styling in here is going to be text gray of 500. And I also want to truncate But this is the same as text ellipsis, but essentially it truncates the text if it exceeds the certain amount, which is going to be truncate, and it's going to have a width of a half. So let's do that and save in here. So now can you see here it truncates it if the message is too long. What will happen is we will replace this with the last message when we fetch the details and the data from Firebase. And then the final div I want to do is a timestamp. So let's quickly do a timestamp. And in the final div, what I want to do is a p tag, and I'm just going to put in 1039 in here. So if we save, I'm going to give the p text a class name, and this is going to be text gray of 500, and the text this time is going to be small. So let's give it a have a look. As you can see, that is working correctly, so that's fine. So now what I want to do is make this a little better and move this all the way to the end. So let's go ahead and do that. So what we need to do is create a new div and wrap these two divs within the outer div. So 1 and 2. This is going to have a class name of flex. So now we need to align the items centrally. So flex, and then items of center, and then justify of between. And now they are between. All I now need to do is give it a gap. So on the outer div, I'm just going to give a gap of 4. So now if we save and go in here, that looks a little better. So that is the sidebar pretty much complete. We are fetching the data, so we're getting the image and the name coming from the server side, and you can see that in our console logs over here. And now if we go into our chat sidebar, you can see here that the chats are now working, and that is in this piece of code here where we have created a reusable chat component. We're mapping through all of the users, and we have a chat component that renders out the relevant information. So now what we can do is delete this comment, and I believe that the chat sidebar is now complete. So what we will be doing next is we will install Firebase, and then we will create a Firebase project, and then we will also get some authentication in place as well. Okay, so now that we've built the WhatsApp UI, so the shell of the application, what we want to do now is create a database so we can handle all of the chat data and the user data in there. So we'll be using Firestore DB for this. So if we go into firebase.google.com and then click Get Started, in here, what I want to do is create a add project. And this is going to be next.js 13 WhatsApp. And then all we do is click Continue. We can enable analytics if you want to, and then click Continue again. Create your project. So this is going to be creating the project now. So whilst that is creating the project, what I want to do is create a folder in our project. So in our next project in here, we have a lib folder that we created earlier. So in here, I'm going to create a folder called Firebase. So this is where all of the config and everything will go. And in Firebase, I'm going to create a new file called index.ts. So now if we go back into the browser, the new project is ready. So let's click continue. So on the left hand side, there's quite a lot of applications that we could use and products. So if we go into the build section here, we have the authentication, which we will use, the app check, which we will use, the Firestore database, and also the storage as well you can use. So if we click on web here, and what I'm going to do is click also set a Firebase hosting, and this is just going to be called WhatsApp, and I'm going to register my app now. So now there's a few instructions in here that you need to do. So first of all, npm install Firebase. So let's go ahead and do that, and also copy this as well. So in my folder in Firebase, I've got an index.ts, and I'm going to paste in what I've just copied across. So all of these with my Firebase config in here. So I will delete this, so please don't copy it. But essentially, it's whatever you create in your Firebase project that will get pasted into here. And we also have analytics, but I'm just going to delete the analytics because we're not going to be using that. So now all we need to do is yarn add Firebase, because we need to import the relevant dependencies from Firebase. So this red error will go away here once it's installed. Okay, so now that we've installed Firebase, the error has gone away, so that's fine. What we also need to do is export the app. So I'm going to export the app like so. And if I save, we have now configured and connected Firebase to our Next.js application. So if we go back into here, we've copied that section. We now need to click Next. This is a step I've already done, but you need to install the Firebase CLI tools on your global machine. So you can copy that and paste that in to your terminal. that will install Firebase tools for you, but I've already done that step. And then if you want to deploy at the end, you can do it this way as well, but we will skip this step for now. So if we click continue to console, we have now set up and connected the Firebase app to our Next.js app. What I want to do is click onto Firestore database. So this is the database that we will be using. And then I'm just going to create the database. So first of all, what I want to do is start in test mode. So the only difference between production and test is the security rules in here. So essentially, if you notice the difference, you can allow read, write, if false, and so on. You can add and configure your security rules, and the same here. But test mode essentially means that you can allow multiple users or anyone to kind of make queries to your Firestore database, which is what we will be using. So click next. And then you can only change this once right now, which is the region that you're closest to. So in my case, it would be Europe, but after that, you can't change the region. So please ensure you choose the correct one closest to yourself. And then you click enable. So now that is provisioning the Firestore, setting it up for you. So your database will be ready to go. So now we have our first Firestore database set up. What I also want to do is on the build section, I want to go into authentication. And in here, we want to get started. So we will be using Google login functionality in here. So all you do is click Google in here and click enable. And then the project name is Next.js 13 WhatsApp. Like so, and then you just click the support email. So in this case, it will be this one, which is the email you logged into on Firebase. So click save. So now we have enabled Google functionality in here, and we will be connecting this also to our Firestore database and using the Google details in our application on WhatsApp. So what we will be doing is using Firebase version 9. So we've connected that and everything's working on here. We now need to go into our app over here. And what I'm going to do is create a Google provider. So const Google provider or Google provider like so, which is equal to new Google Auth provider. And we just need to import this in at the top. So import Google Auth provider from Firebase Auth. So Firebase version 9 uses tree shaking functionality. So essentially, we're branching off from Firebase as a whole. Before, we used to import Firebase and everything from Firebase when we didn't need it. So now we're just importing Google Auth provider from Firebase Auth. And then we have that here. And we also need to export that in here. And we also need to have authentication. So it'll be const auth is equal to get auth. So get the authentication like so. And that's imported also from Firebase Auth. And now we just need to finally export the auth as well. Now, if we save, that is the Firebase initial setup complete. What I now want to do next is create the login page, and we will do that in the app router next. Okay, so now that we have Firebase connected to our app, what I now want to do is create a login page. So in the app directory over here, we have a layout and page.tsx in here. So by default, the top level is going to be the home page. So all we need to do to create a login page /login or whatever it is create a new folder. And whatever you want the route path to be is what you would type in here. So in my case, I'm going to call this the login page. So login like so. And then in login, I'm going to create a new file called page.tsx. And you can also create a root layout for this, which is essentially the layout.tsx. But what I'm going to do is copy the home page and paste it in here like so. And we don't need the get users function in here. And we don't need that as well. I'm going to rename this to login. And then we don't need to import the rest of the information in. So let's delete that and delete the imports as well. So essentially export default async function of login. And there's no asynchronous code we need in the login page. So we can just do a normal function like so. So all we need now is the main tag with display of flex, the height of the screen. We don't want the overflow of hidden. We want the items to be center and justify center as well. And also a BG of white. And inside here, we're going to have a div, which essentially has an image and a login button. So first of all, we want to import the next image tag and press tab again. The width and height of the images is going to be 200. And this is going to be the WhatsApp logo. And this time what I'm going to do is bring in the WhatsApp logo source as a URL and paste that in. And I also might need to update the next config to reflect the new URL. In the outer div, I now need to give styling in here. This will be a display of flex and a flex direction of col, which is column, items of center, and then finally a gap of 10, which means separate the children inside here. So we have an image, and I also want a login button, which I will create a login button component for. Now we can just comment this out. And now if I save all, now I need to start my application again. And then if I navigate to /login now, I should see the login page being rendered. So /login, and as I predicted, you can see here it's got an invalid source prop. So we need to add this URL to next.config.js. So let's go ahead and add that in. And in here, if we just paste it in and close it off and save, we now need to restart the server and then refresh the page. And now, as you can see, the login page is working correctly and the image isn't rendering. So we can see what's up with that. So let's go back in the code. So now if we refresh the page, you can now see the WhatsApp logo being rendered in the middle. And just to check that the app router is working correctly, what I'm going to do is type in something random in here and press enter. And now you can see here we get a 404 page, meaning that this page that we typed in doesn't exist. So if we press back, we go back to the login page here. What I now want to do is create a login button. So let's go ahead and create that. So in here, if I just uncomment this out, in my components, I'm going to close the sidebar now and create a new folder called login, because this is where the login functionality will go. And in here, I'm going to create a new file called login button.tsx. And then I'm going to say RAFCE, and login button is the component. And instead of a div, I want to return a button. And this button will have a class name of padding of 4, first of all, a border black that is rounded, and it's going to be rounded.md, which is, I believe, that is 6 pixels round. And then we want a hover functionality, so hover, and the color will change to BG gray of 100. And then inside the button, I'm just going to say sign in with Google, like so. So now if I save, I just need to import this login button in from my components. And now if we check it on our app, you can see here the button is there, although the border isn't working correctly. So let's just double check what I've typed in here. We also need a height for the border outline, so that will be border 2. So now we have an outline in here. So when we click on it, I essentially want to sign in with the Google Auth provider that we connected earlier, and then we want to then redirect to the home page. So let's go ahead and create that functionality. So on the button, we want an on click, and the on click is going to return a callback, and we want to do handle sign in. So let's create that. So in here, I'm going to do const handle sign in, like so. In here, I want to console.log sign in for now. So let's save and see if that is connecting. So at the minute, there's that error. So essentially what we want to do is just call handle signing like so and invoke it in the function. So now if we look in the console, I have an error in here saying event handlers cannot be passed to client component props, meaning that this is a server component. So we need to convert it into a client component. So use client again. And if we save, that's why we was getting the white screen. If we refresh, you can now see here, we get in the UI back. And then I also want to console log when I click on here. So every time I click on, you can see the sign in appear here. So that is connected. The next thing we need to do is create this signing functionality. So the way to do that in Firebase is, first of all, I want to sign in with pop-up from Firebase, which takes in an auth and a provider. The auth will be the auth coming from our Firebase that we created. So let's go into the lib folder and then Firebase. So we have auth here, and we also have the provider, which is the Google provider. So we can import this from our lib Firebase and then the Google provider, which is coming from our lib Firebase in here. And what we also need to do is chain a dot then in here. So dot then, we get a result, and we want to first of all console log that result to see if it's working correctly. And we also need to close this off. And then I also want to catch the error if there is an error, and we can either console log the error or throw new error. So I'll do that instead. Throw new error like so of error dot message in here. So now if we save, we now are signing in, we can console log the result. But what we want to do essentially is add the user to the Firestore. So let's check what the result is. So if we go into here in our console, I want to go in console and click sign in with Google. Something is going on, which means it's signing in with the pop-up. So we can see here that the signing functionality is kind of working and is connecting to our NextJS 13 WhatsApp Firebase app. So let's close that down for now. And instead of console logging the result, what I want to do is create a new function called add user to Firestore. And we want to pass in the user in here. So instead of the result this time, I'm going to create a constant called user, which essentially is result.user. And I want to add optional chaining in here to see if there is a result, then add result.user. And then we want to pass in add user to Firestore. And once that is complete, then we want to do router.push, which essentially means direct the user to the home page. So there's a few things we need to define in here. First of all is we want to define the router on the page. So let's define that now, which is const router is use router from next/router like so. And then let's create this function. So what I'm going to do now is in my Firebase, I'm going to create a new file in here. And this is going to be called the user controller.ps. So this will handle all of the user functionality in our application. So all I'm going to do is create a function now. So export const add user to Firestore, which is essentially an async function. And let's close this off. And the user that we are passing in is going to be of type user. And this will be coming from Firebase Auth. So that is a user type that we will have. First of all, what we want to do is we want to check if there's a user. So what we will do is instead of adding a document, we will do setDoc. And what we will add is a comment. So if user already exists in Firestore, then we just want to update the last online message. So update the last seen to now. And then if it doesn't exist, if user does not exist in Firestore, then add the user to Firestore. So that is the requirements for this function. So first of all, we need to create a reference to the document that we want to create. So if we go into our Firestore application, in Firestore database, essentially what I want to do is create a collection called users and then add the user as a doc in there, the signed in user. So if we go in here and create a user ref, so const user ref, so this is the user that we are passing in as an argument, is equal to doc. So we want to create a new document from Firestore. So let's import that in. And now we want to get access to the Firestore. So let's create the Firestore hook. So that will be export const Firestore, which is equal to get Firestore from our Firebase app, which is coming from the index here. So I'm just going to call this Firestore app, which will make more sense instead of the app itself. And then if we go into user controller and import Firestore app from the relevant index file, and we also want to get the Firestore. So we need to import the get Firestore hook and also the doc from the relevant Firebase/Firestore. We don't need the rest of these. And in the doc, what I want to do is pass the first argument of the doc, which is the Firestore that I want to connect to and find the doc in, or add the doc in this case. And then the second argument is the collection that I want to create. And then the third argument is the user that I want to create the doc for, which is the user.uid. So that's unique for every single user when we sign into the application. So that is the user's ref. And then we want to await, because this is an asynchronous function. And we want to await setDoc, which comes from Firestore as well. So if we import that at the top, if we hover over setDoc, it says here expected 2 to 3 arguments. So if we go into it, so if you do command click, you can see here it takes in a few arguments. It takes in the reference for the document and then the data. So this is essentially the data we want to pass in. So setDoc is there. So it can take 2 arguments or 3. So this is the 3 arguments in here. So reference the data that we want to pass in. So essentially the user data that we use, and then the options that we want to do. And the options we want to do is we could merge the fields like so, which we will do, which is merge of a Boolean value. So that will be true in our case because we want to update the last seen always whenever the user logs in. So let's go back into our user controller. First argument is the user ref. So user ref like so, and then essentially what I want to do is bring in an object, which is the UID is going to be the user.uid. The name is the user.displayname, the user.email, and then also the photo is the user.photo URL. The final thing is the last online, which is the server timestamp, and this is imported from Firebase also, which means that it gets the local server timestamp for wherever that user is, and that will be stored in the database. The last argument, which is the merge argument, which means update every time the user logs in, which is going to be the merge option of true. So now if I save that, that is the function complete. So adding the user to the Firestore, it receives a user object, which is the object type of the user coming from Firebase Auth. We then get access to a document, which is access the collection of users and then set a document based on the user.uid, which is a unique identifier for every single user when they sign in using the Google Auth provider. That is the first argument. Then we want to set an object in that document, which consists of the UID, name, email, photo, and last online. And then essentially we just want to update the server timestamp, which is what the merge true is saying in here. So if I go into login button, all I now need to do is control space and import that in from our user controller file in the Firebase lib. Once we sign in, we then want to router.push into the home page. If there's an error, then we catch it here. And then essentially, if I save all being well, we should add the user to the Firestore using the Google credentials. And then we should also navigate to the homepage in here. So let's give it a try now. So in the browser, we don't have anything in our Firestore database at the minute. If I refresh the page, you can see there's an error in here on the login button. So let's go ahead and check what the error is. So what happened is the use router is being imported from next router, but it should be from next navigation instead. So now if I save, that error should go away, which it has done. And when I click sign in with Google, I'm going to sign in using my Google credentials. So this is my email address. If I click my email address, what is happening now is it has signed me in, and then finally it has navigated me to the home page. So what you could do there, and what I will do, is implement a loader. So we will do that next. But essentially, if I go into here and go into rules and then back into data, I now have a users collection created, which has created a document which was from my user UID. So this is identical in here. And it has created the object for me of my photo, my name, last online, and also my email address in here. So that is how you would create the user and add it to Firestore also. So just finally, a few changes that I want to make and a few improvements. So what you can do in our app router at the app level is where is page, we could create a loading page, which is what was needed. So in here, I'm just going to create a simple loading page and bring in my code, which essentially is a loader. So I'm going to create a common folder for any common component. And the common component I want to create is a loader.tsx. And the loader I'm going to use is coming from Material UI. So if I just quickly copy and paste this in, essentially it's using the circular progress from Material UI. So therefore we need a use client at the top, and then we have some styling to place it in the center and give a background of white on the whole screen. And this will never change. This is stateless, so we can just wrap it in a React memo like so. So now all I need to do is import the loader in. And now if I save all, what will happen is if I go back into our application and refresh the page, as you saw there was a little loader there happening on the home page. If I do it again, you can see the loader is being incorporated now. So now that we are successfully logged in, I'm just going to close down the loader component and the app component as well. the login button is now complete. What I'm going to do is create a helper file, so helper.ts in the same folder. And instead of having this function in here, what I'm going to do is add it into the helper like so. And I'm going to export this. And what we need to do is just import all of the functionality again. And what I'm going to do is pass in the router as an argument and keep it as of type any for now because this router has a type. So let's go ahead into our login button, and this time I'm going to invoke the function here, handle sign in, and we want to pass in the router like so. And we also need to import it from helper in here. And to get the type for router, all we do is hover over router, and we just need to import app router instance. And I'm just going to delete these unnecessary imports in here. I'm going to handle sign in, and this handle sign in is going to be of app router instance type, which comes from the next folder. So that is all that functionality working. The result is of user credential. So we will let TypeScript infer that type, so we don't need to do anything with it. And that is the login button working correctly. So now if I save all, we now have the login functionality working on our next app. So next up, what we want to do is we want to pull in the data from our user in here and update the sidebar header next. Okay, so now that we're logged in, I want to check that we're logged in and display the relevant icon from my Google provider in here. So let's go into our code. So in sidebar header here, at the minute we're rendering a account circle icon. So what we want to do is we want to check if we're logged in first of all. And the way we want to do that is if we do const is logged in is equal to auth.current user like so. And then the auth is coming from our Firebase lib index here. And then all I want to do is console log the is logged in functionality in here. So now if I save and go into my console, we should essentially get a user object come back, which we do here. So that's good. And that is available across the app really. So what I want to do now is get access to the photo URL there. So as you can see, we have a photo URL. So let's get access to that. And we want to do a bit of conditional logic in here. So if is logged in is true, then essentially what we want to do is render something in here. Otherwise, we want to render the account circle icon. So if we just quickly do this, we have the account circle icon in here. So if is logged in is true, we just want to say p type for now of just some random text. Otherwise, we just want to render the account circle icon, which goes in here. So that's the conditional logic working. So if I save, essentially, because I'm logged in, I should see that text, which is correct. And now all I want to do is render the relevant UI for this. So what I'm going to do is create a user avatar component. So user avatar component is essentially going to be a common component. So let's go ahead and create that. This is reusable now because there are going to be multiple instances on the app where we need this user avatar. So user avatar.tsx. So it's going to be a simple component, which is essentially a next image component. So I'll just bring my code in here. And essentially it is a React functional component that takes in an image and an alt tag in here, which are strings. And then we have a class name here, and it renders out a next image component. So let's go ahead and import this in. So the two props that it receives are the image and alt. So the image is going to be the image coming from the is logged in function. So is logged in, and then we have IntelliSense come in here, and I just want to get the photo URL in here, and I want to do optional chaining here, and then the alt text is going to be the is logged in dot, and then I'm just going to put in the email actually. So now if I save that and save all, I'm going to delete the console log. And then can you see here it says type string or null is not assignable to type string. So what I want to do is if is logged in is not equal to null as the check in here, and that's true, then we want to render the is user avatar. Otherwise, we want to render the account circle icon. And the error is still showing, so I'm going to use TypeScript coercion in here. So image is going to be as a string, or you could wrap it in, which is the other way. So I'll do string like this. So there's multiple ways to fix that error, which is the TypeScript coercion, or you can just convert it into a string like so. So now if I go into the browser, because I'm logged in, I should see that as a new icon, which I am not doing. So let's double check why that is. So if user avatar is equal to null, let's just see if that renders the other one, the other icon. So something is happening there. So let's just check the errors. So essentially the code was working correctly. So if it's not equal to null, then we want to render this user avatar. Otherwise, we want to render account circle icon, which is what is rendering. So we need to log in now. So if we go on to /login and then sign in with Google, so it will authenticate us. And then now you can see here, it has authenticated us, which is correct. And then this is essentially the photo URL in here. So we can see that it is working. We just need to add this onto our nextconfig.js. So let's add that in. So if we go into here, add in the new URL, LH3 of the Google user content, save that. And then we need to restop. And what we also need to do is add some persistence. And you could do that with Firebase. So we will add that into our sign in function. So let's go ahead and do that as well. So let's just check if this is working correctly, first of all. So at the minute we are signed in, but I just want to see why it's not working. So auth.photo it's called and not photo URL. That's why it's not working. So in here, the image should be from the stored detail we're using from Firebase. So if we close down this and in the helper, we close that down as well. And I just want to get into the login button. In the handle sign in, we're adding the user to the Firestore, which is the user that we created earlier on. So on the sidebar header in here, it's going to be is logged in .photo and not photo URL. What I also want to do is console log is logged in to see what I'm getting back. So what we need to do is set persistence from Firebase Auth. So this is going to wrap our sign in with pop-up function. So set persistence, and this takes in two arguments. So the first argument is going to be the auth coming from our auth here, and then the second argument is going to be browser session persistence, which is coming from Firebase auth again. So that's the first argument. Then we want to add the .then functionality, and essentially we want to close it off, and we could add a catch error in here as well, like so. So set persistent is coming from Firebase, and we want to wrap this inside it. So now if I save, we should have some browser persistence now, which is why the icon wasn't showing earlier on. So let's go into our browser in here. And now you can see the user data is being pulled through, and that is the correct icon showing because I am signed in using my Google provider details in here. So now that is everything set up for the login and the user functionality. If we go in here, we now have a collection of users with the document created by the user ID, and then we have access to the user data in here that we can then use in the application going forward. So next up, what I'm going to do is create the chat UI. So the chat functionality as well will follow after that. Okay, so what I want to do now is create the individual chat page. So that will be the localhost /chat/ID of whatever the ID is of the recipient UID coming from Firebase. So we'll create that now. So if we go into our code and at the app level, we've already created a login page, but this time we want a chat page, but using a wildcard ID. So this is a new functionality as well. So the folder is going to be chat. And in here, what I want to do is create a subfolder inside here. So array brackets of ID. And this is basically /chat/ wildcard ID. So it will be the user's UID in our case. So the recipient's UID. So now all I want to do is create a page.tsx. So now that I have the wildcard ID page created, all I want to do is copy essentially what is on the home page, because this is essentially the same structure as the home page, but the only difference is we won't have an image being rendered this time. So let's delete that, and we can import in the sidebar, again fetching the relevant user data, and we want to await get users. So what we can do is, because it's in the home page, we need to just get this get users function and add it into a helper. So in my lib folder, I'm just going to create a new file called helper.tsx in here, and just paste in the get users function and export this out. And we just need to import the relevant type in here. So now we have access to get users across the application. So let's import this in both places. So now if I save, that is working correctly. So all I want to do in the second div is just say that this is a chat, or just type in chat in here. And now all I need to do is navigate to /chat/ a random ID for now because it's not checking the ID. And you can see here the chat is being rendered on the page. So let's create the UI for this. So we have a header here. We have the main body of the message in here, and then we have an input section there. So let's map this out in our component. So here I'm going to create a module called main screen, which I now need to create in the module section. So new file called mainscreen.tsx, and I'm going to do RAFCE of main screen, which is react.fc, and then this div is going to have a class name of width full. It's going to be flex, and all of the children inside are going to be flex of column. So they're just going to stack under each other. Now I'm just going to map what components I need. So I need a header, and then I also need the body for the messages, and then the input is the final one at the bottom. So input. So let's first of all create the main screen header, which I now need to create. So in my components folder, I'm going to close down these ones, and inside I create a new folder called main screen, and inside main screen I'm going to create a new file called mainscreenheader.tsx, and this will be RAFCE. Again, this is a react.fc, a functional component, and then all I need to do is import this in. So if I go into here, what essentially will happen is I'm going to first of all, so what I will do is fetch the user data for the chat that I am in based on the params ID. So I will just name this params ID. So anything to do with the params we will then get from the params object. So you could use it as use params from Next.js, and then this will be done in a use effect. So with use effect, so in this case we will need to have use client in on as this component. So we will be fetching the information from the person we're talking to. So what we will need to do is have some sort of use state as well in there. So to style this div out, the header itself will have similar styling to the other header in the sidebar. So it's going to be sticky. It's going to have a top of 0, padding x of 2, essentially p of 2 on the horizontal and y axis as well. So height of 20, which is the same, a bg gray of 200, and I'm just going to bring in the rest of the code here for the styling. Border bottom of gray 400, a z index of 10, display of flex, align item center, and justify content of space between. Then I'm going to add in a div with the account circle icon for now, and we need to import that in at the top. And I'm going to import in a few icons in at the top actually. So if I import these in, now if I save, I should see the header being shown on the page. And you can see here it says main screen is not defined, so I need to import that in. So if we go into page, and we need to import main screen from our modules folder. So now if I save all, we now have the header component, but what's happening is the items are being centered. So outside here where the main screen is being rendered, so on the page, what I'm going to do is just change the styling. So we are having a width of full, which is correct. And then all we need to do is have a overflow y of auto. So now that has gone to the top there, just like so. So that is working correctly. All I need to do now is add in the relevant icons that we need on the header. So going back into the main screen, into main screen header, I am now rendering the account circle icon, and then I'm going to have another div. So this div will have a few icons with inside it. So I'm just going to bring them in, paste them in, and then I'm going to also have a delete outline icon, which is essentially deleting the chat. And the final icon is going to be a sign out button component that I'm going to create next. So sign out button, and this will be a common component. So now if I save, you can see here there's a few icons being rendered, and if I tap on them, they are working correctly. So I just need to do the same wrapper here for the delete outline icon as well. So now that is working correctly on the header. All I want to do next is create a sign out button. Okay, so what I want to do now is create a sign out button component. So let's go ahead and create that. So in here, I'm going to render a sign out button component, and that's going to go in my common folder in components. So sign out button.tsx, and this will receive props. So tsrafce, and this is going to be react.fc, and the props being received are going to be here. And at the minute, we don't need the props. I'll explain why we don't need the props just yet. But essentially, we could rename this to sign out button props just for a better naming convention. But for now, I'll just keep it as props in here. So in here, what I want to do is have a class name. This will be flex call, and relative. Because what will happen is we'll have the drop down, we click on the drop down, and then we have this sign out text being shown. And in here, we're going to have two divs. First div is going to be an icon button and then a keyboard down icon. So let's import these in from Material UI. And again, this component is going to be a client component. So we're going to be using use client in here. And we need to receive this handle toggle from the parent component. So let's paste that in and destructure it from the props. And we also need open. And this is because we will have a toggle on the parent component. So we will be using use state for this. So I'll just pass in this drop types in here. So that's the first part complete. The second part is we need a drop down. So let's go into the main screen header now. In here now, we want to create a drop down. So we will be using use state in here now. So the first thing is we're going to have a use state for open and set open, which is initially false. We are also going to be having a handle toggle function, which essentially sets open to the opposite of what it was. So false to true and true to false. And then we want to have a constant of handle close. So basically this will close the drop down to false like so. So now all we need to do is pass in the relevant props in here. So open is equal to open and handle toggle is equal to handle toggle. And I also need to import this in like so. So now if I save and we check the browser, the toggle is working. However, we now need to add a drop down inside here as a child component. And to demonstrate that the toggle is working, what I want to do is just console log open just to see if it's going from true to false and false to true. So it's true, false, and that's just toggling like so. So you just keep it as true for now. If we go into our sign out button component, so that is the keyboard down icon in here. So all we want to do now is if it is open, then we want to create a button and this will be sign out. And if I just bring in the class name, essentially it will be an absolute position, the top of 10, bottom of 2, right of 3. And all of this styling is essentially going to make it go underneath the arrow drop down. So let's see if that works. Just finally, we just need to close the open and the brackets like so. So now if we go into here, you can see sign out pops up and it closes like that, which is working correctly. What I also want to do is instead of the and in here, I want to do a question mark. And if it is open as true, then show the button, otherwise show null. There's one more thing to do is on this button, we need to do a non-click because when we click sign out, we should sign out from Firebase altogether. And then we also should redirect the user back to the login page. So on click is going to be sign out from WhatsApp. So now all I want to do is create this function up top here, which is essentially sign out from WhatsApp. We console log the signed out from WhatsApp in here. But essentially what I need to do is sign out. So the way to sign out is quite simple. We get access to the auth from our Firebase lib here. And then all we do is auth.sign out like that. And then we need to then redirect the user back to the login page. So router.push, and then you just do /login in here. And then we also need access to the router. So const router is equal to use router, and that comes from next navigation. And again, you could separate this into its own helper file, but we'll just keep it in here for now. That should be good enough to have as the sign out button component. So now if we go back into main screen header, we have the sign out button working here and the rest of the component is in here. What I also want to do is have a click away listener, and this comes from Material UI. So essentially when I click away from here, which I am doing, this should set the handle close function off. So if we go back into our code and outside of this div here, we could have a click away listener on click away to handle close. So essentially we just need to close it off now, which I will do after this div in here. And now if I save, if I click away, it closes it off. So click here, it closes it off, and you don't need to press it here as well. So that's a handy tip to use from Material UI. So that's a good one. Okay, so now we've done the header. We now need to do the body of the messages. So this component is going to be called message body. Essentially, it will contain all of the messages. So we now need to create this body in the component section. So in main screen, new file, message body.tsx, and this is RAFCE of message body, which is essentially again a react.fc. And in here, we're going to have a div with a class name. So we're going to import the background that we have normally in the WhatsApp messages body. So let's add that in. So we're going to have a class name in here. So first of all, we have an overflow y of auto, flex, and flex call. So everything will go down into a column. A min height of the screen. So min h is screen. Take up the 100 VH of the min height. We're going to have justify content of end, and then this is how you would add backgrounds into Tailwind on a certain background image or so on. So this will be bg dash, and then you have array brackets, and then you would put in your URL. So URL, and then you would have your speech marks in here, and then I'm just going to bring in the URL. And then what we want to do is close this off. So I will use the backticks and then the JSX brackets in here. And then we also need to do it at the start as well. So now all I need to do is render a p tag saying hello. And now if I save and check the message body, essentially what will happen is it will take up all of the rest of the space onto the page, and it will render this background in here as the image background. So there's one more thing we need to do, which is essentially import the message body in the main screen. So let's go ahead and do that. And now save. And now, as you can see, we now have the WhatsApp background with the hello text here being rendered at the bottom. So the next thing we need to do is add the bottom bar, which is the message import. So let's go ahead and do that now. So on the main screen component, we now have this header and the body. And now I'm just going to create the final one, which is message import, which essentially is going to be a React functional component. So let's have that. And we now need to create this. So in my main screen in here, create a new file, and again, REFCE. And this is going to have a few things. It's going to have icons, it's going to have an input, and the input is going to be of type form, because when we press enter, we want to submit the information and add it to the Firestore database and configure our messages collection, which we will look at. So first of all, I want a div, and this div will have the class name, essentially putting the div right at the bottom of the page and keeping it sticky like so. We will have an icon button of the mood icon within the div. We will also have another icon button of the attach file icon. So this is where we will add and attach files into our Firestore storage buckets, which we will look at later on. And then finally, what we will do is we will have a form, and this won't have an action, but it will have an on submit. So on submit, and this on submit is equal to send message, which is a function we will create. Again, we don't have that functionality, so I'm just going to create send message, and I'm just going to say console log message sent, like so, just so we have that in there for now. And then finally, we're going to have another icon button with a keyboard outline. In the form on submit, we're going to have an input. So I'll bring in the input in here, and the input value is going to be using the use state. So let's just bring in the use state information in at the top, which is a use state of message text, and at the minute it's empty. And then we want to update the message text on e.target.value. So whenever we press a button, for example. So now let's see if that's showing up. It isn't, because we need to import it now on the main screen. So now, as you can see, it is being rendered onto the page over here. We just need to fix the styling a little bit. So let's go into the message import, and the form will need to have a class name of width of full. So we can add that in here as well. So width of full, and that should fix the import now, which it has done over here. So that is the UI complete. What we will do next is create a modal, so that when we click on this icon here, we will then be able to select from a modal and a list of contacts, and then create a chat with that contact. So we will do that next. Okay, so what I want to do now is create a app model. So when I click on this, I want a model to appear with the list of the contacts coming from the Firestore database. So coming from here, all of the users that get listed on here. So let's go ahead and do that. So in the components folder, I'm just going to create a new folder in here called app model. And in here, I'm going to create a file index.tsx and refce. This is the app model component, and this is a react.fc. And what I want to do is create this model and make it reusable. So what we'll be doing is importing the model coming from Material UI. So if we check the docs from Material UI, if we scroll down, we have a section where it talks about models just here. So this is the type of model we want to create. As you can see, this is what we will be doing. So if we go back in our app, we're going to have an outer div and then an inner div inside here, and this is going to be the toggle for the whether the model is open or not. So on click is going to be equal to handle open, which we need to create some use state for that, and then we're going to render a icon that we click on. So we will pass that in as props, and let's close that div off. So the props we will receive is the icon as the first prop. After that, what I want to do is just bring in my code. So essentially what I'm doing is bringing in model, which is coming from Material UI. The box is coming from Material UI. And then what I want to do is, first of all, render a title, which comes from the props as well. So that will be the title being rendered within the model. So everything in here is the model. So everything inside this div here. And then we got an extra div, so we don't need that. And we need to create use state for the open and the handle open and handle close functionality. So let's create that now. So essentially what it is the use state of open and set open. Handle open will basically set open to true, and handle close will set open to false. I also need the box styling. So I'm going to create that in a separate helper file. So helper.ts. And if we go into Material UI documentation, it gives you the box style anyway, so we can just copy that, which is essentially this over here. So if we go in our code here, and I just want to export this like so, and it's going to be called box style. So now all I need to do is import this box style in from the helper, and now I need to render the app model somewhere. So passing in the icon and the title, and I also want to pass in the model type because we want it to be reusable, so we can handle the model children inside here. So first of all, I'm going to create props. So type props is equal to icon title model type, and then we just need to pass this in here like so. So the icon is going to be a JSX element because the icon is coming from Material UI, which is essentially a component. So JSX element, and then the title will be a string and a model type will be a string. So that's fine. So we need to then import app model onto the sidebar header component. So let's find that component in the sidebar header. So instead of the chat outline icon, it's going to be the app model like so. But what will happen is we will pass in the relevant props. So the props for app model is the icon, which is the chat outlined icon. The title is a string of all contacts, and this model type is the chat, or you could call it contacts, whatever you wish. So now that is there. So now if I save, and now if I click onto here, we now have a model working on the page which says all contacts. So now what we need to do is fetch all of the user information in here. So now what I want to do in here is fetch all of the user information, but we need to add some users into our user database. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm just going to quickly add some users and be right back. So if we go into our cloud Firestore, all we want to do is add a document. So add a document, auto ID in here, and then I'm just going to add another user in. So I've got a user of Yoda from Star Wars. So this is an email address. We want to add in the name, which is Yoda. We want to add the photo, which I will get. And then last online is a timestamp. So this will be of type timestamp. You can put whatever you want in here. I'm just putting in some random time in there. And then the last one is the UID. So this is the structure of what we will have in our database when we create a new user. And it is the same when we do that and we are doing that already. So now we have 2 other users other than myself. So we should be able to fetch Darth Vader and Yoda into our all contacts modal. So going back into our code in here, I've got this function in here which handles the children of the modal dependent on what modal type it is. So we need to create this function. So if I create this function in the helper, so export const the handle modal children, and this will bring in the relevant argument, which is the modal type, the contacts, and handle close, which is essentially going to close the modal. So we need to define these types. So first off, the icon modal type is going to be a type that we need to create. So type of icon modal type is a union type, and it's not add and edit, it's going to be upload, and it's also going to be the chat, which is what we passed in as props. That one's set up correctly, and I just want to export it in case it's needed elsewhere in the app. And then the contacts type is essentially going to be this object here. So email, last online, name, photo, and UID. So what I'm going to do is declare this in the types.d.ts over here, and I'm just going to bring it at the bottom, which is the contacts type of email string, ID of string, last online is an object, name, photo, and UID. So all I will do is put ID as optional because we don't have it in at the moment. So that is the contact type. So if we go back into our helper function, we just need to import this in now, like so, which is there. And then in here, we need to handle something. So I'm going to handle it based on the modal type. So switch modal type. If it is upload, then we want to return upload modal, which we can do in here. So upload modal. And again, we want to pass in the handle close because that is being passed in from the parent component. So in app modal, like so. And then we also want a case for chat, which essentially is going to be the chat modal, and we pass in the contacts and the handle close as well. So the default is just going to be a return like that. And then finally, we just need to close it off, and we don't need to return anything actually. So there's a few things we need to do. Upload modal needs to be created, and also the chat modal. So what I'll do with the upload modal is just put it in strings for now. So it just returns that as a string. And then the chat modal we need to create inside here. So new file is going to be chatmodal.tsx. And what you can do is you can separate it into subfolders or however you want to have your folder structure. But for this, I'm just going to put it in the same folder. And I'm going to do refce. And then in here, I'm just going to put a p tag. This is the chat modal. So, and then react.fc in here and save. And I'm going to also create the upload modal as well. Upload modal.tsx and paste this in, but instead of chat this time, it's just going to be upload like so. And then in the helper, all I now need to do is import it in from the relevant file path. And if I save all and then import from the relevant file path, but what I also need to do, I've just realized, is I've got JSX in this file, but this is only a TS file. So let's rename this to TSX because we are rendering JSX in here. So now we can import the relevant files that we need. And then if we just copy these as they are needed in the relevant modal files, so chat modal will receive these props in here of contact and handle close, like so. And we just need to put a comma in here. And then the upload modal will have the handle close in here, like so. And again, we need to define the types for these. So we can do that in a helper file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do index.interface.ts, which will handle all of the types in this app modal folder. So first off, we've got this type in here, which we want to handle in the interface file. So paste that in, and then we can import this in here. The handle close is going to be of type void. So essentially, it's not returning anything. So going into here, we need chat modal props, and we also need upload modal props. So export type of chat modal props, and chat modal props, it takes in contact and handle close. So we already have copied the handle close one. So I just need to copy the contacts one as well, paste them in, and import contacts type from the types.d.ts over here. And then I just want to copy this, but this time it's going to be the upload modal props. And in the upload modal props, we just need the handle closed this time. So going back in here, we can delete this one. So now we have chat modal props, which is the type that we can import. So that is handled there. And then the upload modal props is handled in here. And then if we go into here, we just need to import handle modal children. And we can see here there's an error saying string is not assignable to parameter icon modal type. So if we go into modal type, that is a string and cannot find name contacts. So we would need to fetch the contacts. So first of all, I'm going to say const contacts is an array. So that's the contacts. And then the modal type we need to pass in. So now we've got the error of modal type. I just want to double check the prop of modal type is being passed in correctly. So it's either upload or chat. So if I go into the sidebar header component, the modal type is chat, so that is correct, and it's a string as well, so that's fine. So if we go into the app modal once again, and app modal receives icon, title, and modal type. So essentially what I want to do here is change this from a string to icon modal type, and then that error should fix itself now, which it has done. And then contacts, we now need to fetch the contacts data. So let's go ahead and do that. So now what I want to do is fetch contacts in real time. So fetch user data, user contacts in real time from Firestore, like so. And then we need contacts. So I'm going to declare the use state for contacts, which is going to be equal to contacts type array. And then after that, I'm going to bring in a use effect. So essentially what would happen is the use effect would have a non-snapshot of the user's collection, which is coming from our user controller, which essentially is accessing the collection of the Firestore and in particular the user's collection. So going back into our app modal, we need to import the snapshot, which is of type query snapshot and document data. So that is imported up top here, document data and query snapshot. And then now we need to create a get snapshot doc function. And essentially what a get snapshot doc function is essentially an object that is going to be returned. So let's go ahead and create that in the user controller. So what I'm going to do is create the function. So export function of get snapshot doc. And this takes in a doc, which is of type document data from Firestore. So if I import that, and essentially what will happen is it will return an object of id of doc.id and data of doc.data in here. So that is the structure that it will have. So if I go back in app modal, all I now need to do is import that in, and now that is all the contacts set. What I now want to do is console log the contacts just to see if we are fetching the contacts in here. So we should be getting 3 contacts, including the logged in contact as well. So if I go back into the browser, in here, it's just loading now. So if we inspect and we want to see in the console the contacts list. So when I open the modal, we now have a list of 3 contacts in here. That is including myself. So we need to filter myself out from here. So let's go ahead and render the UI now. So in the browser, we are getting the contacts in here. So let's delete this console log, and then in handle modal children, what we now have is access to the contacts. So in the chat modal, which is where the contacts are being rendered and passed in as props, all we now need to do is go into here, and instead of chat modal, this should be called the contact list. So let me just rename this chat modal to contact list across the board. So now that it is the contact list, if we go into it, we just need to render the UI for the contact list. Now we have access to the contacts. First of all, what I want to do is filter. So contact.filter. So for each contact.id, I want to get access to the one that is not equal to the auth.currentuser.uid, which is essentially all the contacts that are not the same as the logged in user. So that's the first thing we need to do. And I want to do optional chaining here. Then I want to do .map. And for each contact, I want to implicitly return a div or h1 for now, just saying the contact.name in here, just to see if that works. So now if I save, we have an error in here. So we just need to add an extra parentheses in here. And there's an error because we need to add a key to all React children. And this key is going to be the contact.id in here. So now if I save and check the browser, we should have a list of 2 contacts in here, which is Darth Vader and Yoda, because we filtered out myself. which is in the contacts array over here. So that's fine. Now that that is working correctly, I'm now going to create a div. So instead of a h1 this time, it's going to be a div. The key of the div is going to be the contact.uid, and then it's going to have a class name as well for this div. And I'm just going to bring in the styling for the class name of flex, justify store, item to center, a padding on the y-axis of 4 with a gap of 4, and some hover styling as well. I'm going to bring in a user avatar as well, so we can see the user avatar's image in here. And then we also need a div that has the contact name, so p with the contact.name in here, and then also the date, so that will be a p tag of contact dot last online. So you get in the TypeScript IntelliSense now, and I'm just going to say seconds in here. So now if I save, essentially we're filtering out myself, the logged in user, then we're mapping over each user to render this UI here. What you could do is split this out into its own component as well to make it more reusable. But for now, what I'm going to do is just check the browser, and now you can see all of the contacts are being shown in here. All that we need to do now is handle the date. So I will do that with function overloads with TypeScript. And then when we click on a user, what we want to do is then navigate to a new URL with a new ID, so the recipient's ID. And then we want to create a new chat in here for the new user that we've clicked on in here. Okay, so now that the contacts are rendering in the modal, what I want to do is when I click on it, I want to navigate to a new page with the recipient's ID. So Darth Vader's ID when I click on him, and Yoda's ID when I click on him, and then that chat should open. And then also what I want to do is format the date for this, because this is an, and then what I also want to do is create a function overload with TypeScript and format the date as well. So let's first of all do the routing. So in my component here, when I click onto this div here, I'm going to have a function call. So this function is going to be called choose contact. So let's go ahead and create this function on click. So this function is going to be called choose contact in here. And what I want to do with choose contact is pass in the contact and also pass in the handle clause. And I also want to navigate to the relevant page. So I'm going to pass in the router, and I need to import that in at the top here. So const router is equal to use router, which is coming from next navigation. So what I'm going to do is create this function in the helper file over here. So just underneath export const of choose contact, which is a function like so. And this function with choose contact will receive a few arguments in here. So the first one is the contact, the handle clause, and then the router. So if I go back in contact list, router is of app router instance. So we just copy that across. Then we also need to import this in from the next folder. And then the first thing I want to do is invoke the handle clause function, because when we click on a contact, we want to close the modal off. And then other than that, we want to navigate to router.push /chat /contact.uid like so. So now if I go back into my contact list in here, all I need to do now is import this function. So now if I save, I have now rendered the onClick for the choose contact in my contact list. And now let's test to see if that works. So in here, I'm going to click on Darth Vader, and I should get the relevant UID for Darth Vader. So it will be / the UID, which is this one here, ending in flu. So let's try it out. So as you can see, it has changed and it ends in flu here. So that's working correctly. The only thing to do now is format the date. So let's create a function overload with TypeScript. So essentially, I want to have a function overload in the helper of format date. So I'll just add this in underneath. So this is a TS function overload. So this would seem a little weird at first, but what happens is you declare a function multiple times and take in different types of arguments. So essentially, first argument is going to be called export function of format date, which is a function that can take in a date that is of type number. So that is in our case is the type number, and then it will return a string. The second one is pretty much the same, but now we are returning a date this time. So the type is date, and then again returns a string. And then what we want to do now is we want to type check this. So export function of format date, and this time it's going to take in an argument of, let's call it arg1, and this type is going to be of unknown. And then what this function will do is it will return a string once again, but this time we're going to have the parentheses, and then we're going to check for the type of arg1 this time, and we're going to see if it's a number we want to do something, if it's a date we want to do something. So it's already kind of given it me here, so we can, first of all, if type of arg1 is equal to a number, so if the date is basically a number, or arg1 is a number, because at this moment in time it's unknown, so we don't know what it is, then we want to do something in here. So I'm going to put in a comment in here. So, and also I want to put in a comment in at the top as well. So this is doing the type check at runtime and not build time or compile time. So this is very important to understand. And then what we want to do is, if it is of type number, we want to convert Unix timestamp to date below to a date. So I've got the blocker code in here. So let's just bring that in as the return. So paste that in like so. And we could chain it on like this and check do multiple if checks. But in my case, what I want to do is just do an else block, because there's only two arguments it's going to be. It's going to be of type number, or it's going to be of type date in here. So the second argument, what I'm going to do is bring in the functionality in here. So const today's date is going to be a new date to locale string of the US. You could do whatever you want in there. And then what happens is this second argument of to locale string, you can see here you get year, month, day, week, day, hour, and so on. And then if you hover over it, you can have the options, the union types of numeric, 2 digits, or undefined. So you can select what you essentially want in here, like that. So now that is the function overload complete. So what we are doing is we're checking the type of arg1. At the minute it's unknown. It could be a number or it could be a date, and then it will return whatever the type of is in here. So if it is a number, it will return time only, or if it's a date, then it will return today's date, like so. So now all I need to do is get this format date in here, and then go into my contact list, and then where we got the time in seconds, I just need to wrap it in format date in here, and then all I do is import it in from the helper. So now if I save, the date should now be working correctly. So let's just double check that out in the browser. And I click here. You can see here now the date's showing in the exact same correct way. So this is when I actually created the users. So that is that section. And then when I click onto Yoda, for example, that URL there changes as well. One final thing that I want to do is, when I navigate between pages, there should be some sort of loading state. So in my chat app folder in here, in the app directory, I'm going to create a new file in here. So this is loading.psx, which is a guarded keyword for anything to do with loading on the next app router. So essentially all I'm going to do is paste in loading from here, and then I just need to implement the loader, which is coming from the common components in here, like so. So now if I save, and then I navigate to a new page, so like Darth Vader, you can see the loader showing up there. So that is that section complete. Okay, so what I want to do now is, in our Firestore database, here we have a collection of users. So now what we want to do is create a collection of messages or chats. So what we need to do is implement that in the code. So it's quite similar to what we've done in our user controller. So navigating to the lib Firebase folder in here, we have a user controller file in here. So in the user controller file, we get access to a user's collection, and then we have a function here that adds the user to the Firestore. In here, we have a user ref, which is essentially the doc for each chat that we have. Then we set the doc and we update the data in the doc itself. And the merge through is only for whenever a user logs in, each time the server timestamp or the last online gets updated. So what we need to do now is create a new file called messagecontroller.ts in here. And in message controller, what I want to do is just copy this across into message controller. What we can also do is get this Firestore and put it in our index file, but I'll just leave it in here for now. So first of all, we want to get Firestore, and then we want to get access to our Firestore app, which is coming from the index.ts file, and just import that in. And then what we also want to do is create a chats collection and not a users collection this time. And again, we need to import collection from Firestore also. And then instead of users, I want to name this as chats in here. And the first function we want to create is a new chat. So it's going to be a function in here. So export const of create new chat, which is going to be an async function. And this takes in a few arguments, but we'll leave them for now. So initially what we want to do is console.log the chat that gets passed into here. So what we now need to do is, if you look into our app on the browser, essentially when I navigate to a user, so if I click on here and I navigate to, for example, Yoda, then this will navigate to the relevant URL. But what I have done is created a new user in here, which is another account of myself. So let's go ahead and navigate to that. So as you can see here, we have my user ID in here. And then this is a chat that should be created in the Firestore chats collection. So what we want to do is whenever we type in here and submit the form, then we want the message to add to the chat collection as a doc in there. So what we want to do is get access to the message import, and then with the function we've just created, which is the create new chat, it receives a chat in here, or a message we could rename it as, because that's what it will be. And then essentially we just want to console log the message for now. So if I save this, and then when we submit, we want to get the value of message and pass that into the create new chat function, which is essentially this function we've created here. So let's copy that. And when we submit now, we have the e.prevent default. And straight after that, what I want to do is invoke the create new chat function, passing in the message. And what we need to do is import this as well from the message controller. So because this is an async function, we need to handle that in the message import as well. So this will be an async function, and what we want to do is await the create new chat and pass in the message in here. So what I also want to do is define this as a message constant in here, and instead of calling it message, I'll call it message input. And then we just want to console log the message input after the message is sent as well. So now if I save all, and what we need to do is test this out in the browser. So if I inspect and go into my console, what I want to do is when I submit on the form, so if I type in something, so I'll type in hello, press enter. Now we can see the message is being sent. So what we now need to do is hook this up to Firebase. So essentially we want to add a new collection in here of chats, and inside chats we're going to have the documents in here, and inside the documents we're going to have the messages stated on a collection in here. So let's go ahead and do that now. So instead of create new chat or message, we're going to pass in a few arguments this time. So if we go into create new chat in here, and there's a few things we want to log out. So if I just delete this, and first thing that we need to do is get access to the current user is the first thing we need to do. So whoever's logged in, that's who we need to get access to. And then we want to get access to the recipient or the person we're messaging. So get access to the recipient. Then we want to get access to the message via the Firestore. So let's go ahead and do that first. So the first one is quite simple. We first of all defined an auth in index.ts, which is here. So we want to get the auth, and then we want to get access to the current user. So we can do that quite easily. So it will be the const of current user, I'm going to call it, is equal to auth.current user, and we need to import this from the index file. And I want to first of all have optional chaining in there to say if there is an auth, then we want to access the current user. So that one's fine. So we can tick this one off. The second one, what we need to do here is create a function for getting the recipient user. So what I'll do is I'll create a function for this, which is going to be get a single user from the Firestore. So we will leave that one for now. And then we want to get access to the message via the Firestore. So first of all, we need to create the message, and then we want to get a chat ref to this. So it's going to be const chat ref, or single chat ref, is equal to, and we want to get access to a specific document in here. So it will be doc from Firestore. And then the first argument will be the Firestore, and then the second argument will be the collection name. In our case, it's going to be the chats. And then the message UID will come from the URL params, which is essentially this ID here. So the person that I speak to and the person that is the recipient of the chat. So for example, if I click on Darth Vader, what will happen is we will get Darth Vader's ID in here, and then that will be appended onto the URL in here. So that is the ID we will need to get in the Firestore. So the document will be added in here. So if we go back to our code again, I need to import the doc, and then this will change. So we need to change this to the router ID. So we will pass this in as an argument. So I'm going to name this router ID, and we need to access that in the params. So going back into our message import file in here, I want to get access to the params, which is quite simple to do. It's const params is equal to use params, and that comes from next navigation, like so. And then what we want to do is we want to pass in the argument of params.id in here, which essentially is grabbing the ID from the URL, and then that's being used as the router ID as well. So these are the two arguments that I need. What I'm going to do in here is create new chat. If we go into it, I'm going to rename this to message text, which essentially is going to be a string that we pass in. And first of all, we're getting access to the current user, which is fine. We need that. We also need access to the router ID. So we want to check the type for this, and the type for the params ID is going to be a string. So if we go into here, we just define the type for this, which is essentially a string. So we have access to the message text and router ID. We want to get access to the recipient user, which we've established, and we're going to create a function to get a single user from the Firestore. That is handy because we can use that function across the app. Then we want to get access to the message or the chat via Firestore. So we go into our Firestore, into the chats collection, and then we access the doc that has the specific router ID inside. So now what we did was in the user controller, we did the same thing, but we did a set doc in here. So we're going to do the same thing again. So let me just copy this, and it's the same functionality in the message controller, but there's a slight difference. So in here, we want to import set doc from Firestore. Instead of users ref, it's going to be chats ref. And now what we need to do is define an object in here of how we want the structure to be. So essentially what I want to do is first of all create the object, and let's work through it together. So what I want is a link, which means that we need to get the link from the URL, which is essentially the router ID. So that's the first thing I want to define, which is a link. Then I want to define an object of messages, and in this object I want to pass in an array of messages. So I'm going to type in message is equal to multiple objects inside here. So every time a user adds a message, this whole object will get populated, and it should occur straight after, continuing and going forward like so. So in the message, first thing I want is the message body, which essentially is the message text being received from here. So we need that, which is important. We also need a created at time. So this will tell us the created at time, which essentially is a new date. So if I save that, we also need the message sender, which is the person sending the message. So that is essentially the current user dot email, I'm going to say. And then what I also want is the message sender ID, in case we need the ID for anything in here, which is essentially current user ID. And then I'm just going to put a comment in here, which is saying that this is only used for the first index of the array. So essentially what we want to do is get the message recipient details. So this is only used for the first index of the array. And all I want to do is get the message recipient details. So instead of message sender now, it's going to be message recipient, and that's going to be the recipient details that we get from here. And then we also need the message recipient ID as well. So I'm just going to paste that in here as well. And for now, I'm just going to put in a string in here. And then also in here, I'm just going to put another string in here just to satisfy it for now. And if I save, that's fine. So what happens is we have a create new chat function, which is an async function that takes in message text, which is a string, and it also takes in the router ID, which is coming from the params object. Then we get access to the current user, which is whoever's logged into the application. We now need to get access to the recipient user, but we'll leave that in for now. This is the functionality that will get added to the Firestore. So what will get added is the link, so we can access the link for the message in case we wanted to link out to another route. Then we have the messages in this object in here, and in here we want to have a message in the shape of this. So each time we type in a message, this message should get added, and essentially when there's an update we should do merge of true. So if I go into the message input in here, I now have this send message function. So what I now need to do is create the new chat. So in this send message function, I want to make a few changes. So I'm going to delete this and the console log as well, because we'll be able to check the Firestore database this time. I'm going to delete the async in here. And essentially when I do a form submit, I want to prevent default behavior. We want to create the new chat. And then what we also want to do is set the message text back to the empty string in here. And I also want to add a guard clause in here. So I want to check if message is equal to an empty string, then we want to return. So essentially, if nothing is typed in, then we don't want to invoke this function in here. So that is all set. So if I save this now, go into our browser, we want to refresh the page. And now the page is refreshed. I want to type in hello once again and press enter. So now we can see that the message text has disappeared when I pressed enter. So now we want to see if the document has been created in the chats collection. So at the minute, we don't have a chats collection. So all we need to do is go into rules. And then if we go back into data, we should see the chats collection populate. So in here, we can see now we have a chats collection, which is the document of this UID for the person I'm speaking to. So let's just double check that is correct. So it ends in CB2, which is correct. So that has created a document. If I go into here, we have the structure. So essentially we have a message that says hello. The recipient is here, which is the strings that I've manually typed in, but we need to fix that. We have the message sender, which is myself, and the message sender ID also, which is myself. There is one caveat though. So if I typed in another message, so I'll say goodbye this time, the expected behavior would be that it would add another message in here. So it will be message 1, message 2, and so on. So instead of hello, it will say goodbye underneath. But what happens is if I submit this and press enter and go to here, as you saw, the message just got replaced. So that is because we are using setdoc. So we need to use setdoc to update the message, but we need it as an array of objects. So the way to do that in Firebase is using something called an array union. So let's go ahead and implement that. So if we go back into create new chat in here, where we have the message object in here, what I want to do is wrap it in something called an array union. And then this wraps the object in parentheses like so. And then we also need to import this from Firebase. So now if I save, essentially what an array union is updates elements in an array. So this object is now an array. So each time we submit this form event, a new object like this gets added onto this array union in here. So that is a handy feature from Firebase that is good in Firebase 9. So let's just check to see if that works on the application. So if I now type in a new array in here, so we have the goodbye, and now I want to type in a new message. So I'm going to say hello again this time. Press enter. So now we have hello again, but this time you can notice here we have an index of an object inside the message. So now message has turned from an object into an array of objects. So if I expand this and type in something again, what I should see is an index of the number 1 added underneath. So let's go ahead and type something in here. So I'm going to say hi Imran and press enter. So now as you can see here, now we have an array of messages, which is handy because what we will do is map through it to show the list of messages in the message body. So now that functionality is working and that is all set. So what we now need to do is finally get the message recipient details. So now let's create the function for the recipient details, which is get access to the recipient user in here. So what I'm going to do is create a function called get single user from Firestore. But what I'll do is I'll add that into the user controller because it's more relevant in there. So underneath all of this, I'm going to say export const of get single user from Firestore. And what we want to do is pass in a user ID. So again, this is a async function, and I'm going to close this off for now. And then what we need to do is fetch the details for the single user. So let's go ahead and do that. First off, what I want to do is do a guard clause. So if no user ID, then I want to return. Then I want to get access to the user ref, but instead this time what I'm going to do is add template literals in here. So it's going to be /users / the user ID. So this is the wildcard user ID. So let's go ahead and wrap this in curly braces and close this off here. So essentially I want to go access the Firestore, but instead of the chats collection, we want to access the users collection, cycle through that and get the relevant user based on the user ID that we pass into here. Then we want to get the user doc. So that's going to be await get doc, and that is the user ref. So the user snap is fine. And then what we want to do is get the data for the user snap. So that will be user snap dot data, like so. And then what we want to do is return the user at the end here. So that is how you would get a single user from Firestore. So all we need to do now is pass in the user ID. So if we copy this and go into the message controller, and at the top here, we want to get access to the recipient user details. So I'm just going to say const recipient details is equal to await, and the function is get single user from Firestore. And because the router ID is the recipient's user's ID, we can just pass in the router ID like so. And we just need to import get single user from Firestore. And again, it's awaiting it because this is an async function in here. So if we go back into our message controller now, we have successfully done all of these comments. So I'm just going to delete them out. So adding comment is quite handy because you can map out what we need to do inside the function. So now I have access to the recipient details. What I want to do is, instead of the message recipient, I'm just going to console log what the recipient details are, just so we can see what we get back and see if it is correct. So now if I save everything and type in a message, so I'm going to say hey again and press enter. So essentially here we have access to the recipient details, and what we have is an email, last online, name, photo ID and UID, which is essentially the same information we have stored in our Firestore database. So in here, if we go into users, the recipient in this case is going to be this one ending in CB2. So if we cross-reference that, and you can see here the UID ends in CB2, and just to double check that is correct, this is the recipient user in here. So that is correct. What I want to do now is get access to the information. So I need the UID, which is the ID, and then the recipient email. So if I do that now in the code, so instead of the string that I have defined in here, we can just do message recipient is recipient details dot email, and then again recipient details dot ID in here, or dot UID in here. So now that is the create new chat function complete, and we are now adding successfully messages to our Firestore database, and we have also created a chat collection. So now what I want to do next is, when I submit a chat saying something on here and press enter, I want it then to populate onto here, and we also need to get the recipient details in here also. So that's what we will do next. Okay, so now that we have the message import working, so that functionality is correct, and we have the messages being sent in our Firestore database in here, what we will now want to do is get access to the single chat in here from the Firestore database, and then get access to the message recipient details and the message sender details, so we can render the relevant information in both the header and also in the body. So what we can do is get the single chat data from the Firestore database. So we've already done that with the user information. So it's just a case of creating a new function. So if I go into user controller, all I'm doing is accessing the user's collection in here and then passing in the user ID. So all I'm going to do is just copy this and go into my message controller, and underneath paste this in. There's a little change we need to make. So it's going to be get single chat from Firestore, and then it's going to be the chat ID that we get in. So all we need to do is replace user ID with chat ID, and then we also need to import get doc, and wherever it says user, it's going to now be chat. So let's command D wherever it says user, and that will be chat. So now essentially that is the function there, which is get a single chat from Firestore. We pass in the chat ID, which is coming from the params, and then we do our check. So if there's no chat ID, then we just want to return and do nothing. Otherwise, we get the access to the chats ref, which is chats/chat ID, which is the chats collection. And then we want to get that dot, which is essentially the ID that we receive from the argument in the function. And then we just want to get the data in here. So that is the function created. So now what we want to do is in our header, so in our main screen header, if we go into here, we now want to get access to that information. So all I want to do is at the top or just under handle close, because this is a client component, we just want to run this on the page load. So we just need a use effect. So use effect. And in here, what I want to do is, first of all, I'm going to put in a comment saying get the chat from Firestore. And then what we want to do is we want to check the user and see if they are the sender or receiver. Before we do any of that, we want to get the chat from Firestore and see if it exists. But it will exist because what we have is routing in the app, where what we do is if we click on the sidebar in our browser, so if we click on this user, it navigates to the relevant user ID in here. So unless you typed in a random piece of text after here, what will happen is you should get a 404 page, which is essentially what we need to configure. So we'll do that next. But for now, I'm just going to go back and leave it as it is. So we want the user avatar in here, and we want the name or the email being added onto here. So let's go ahead and do that. So first of all, we want to get the chat and see if it exists, which it probably will do. So all we need to do is paste in our get single chat from Firestore function, which will take in the argument. So the handy thing with TypeScript is if we hover over it, it tells you here expected one argument but got 0. And in here, you can see that this expects a chat ID of a string, which essentially is the router ID. So we need to fix that. So before we do that, I just want to close off this use effect. And we just want to run it on mount for now, but this will have a dependency of the params ID. So we just need to get the access to the params at the top of the component. So const params is equal to use params once again. And that's coming from next navigation because we are using the client. And then all we do is params.id in here. And we only want to get the single chat from Firestore when the params ID updates. So that's when it should only run. So we pass that in the dependency array in here. And then this get single chat from Firestore is a promise, as you can see here, and it returns document data or undefined. So what we now need to do is chain a .then method onto here. And for each chat, I just want to, first of all, console log the chat and see what that returns. And then what we can also do is do a .catch, and then also just log out the error if there is an error in here. And be more specific, we can do error.message like so. Now, if I save, on the mount of this page, we should get access to whatever the chat is coming from the Firestore database. So now that is saved. So if we go back into the browser, I just want to inspect the console to see what is being returned from this response that we get. And at the top here in main screen header.tsx, we get an object that gets returned, which has the link of ending in CB2, which is essentially this URL here. So we are getting the chat from the Firestore, and in the messages, we have a message array containing all of the messages inside here. So that is fetching the right data correctly. So that's the first part of the function done. So we can now go back into main screen header, and in this block here, so in the .then block, what we now need to do is check the user and see whether they are the sender or receiver. So that is the next thing we need to do. And we can delete this comment out now and move this one up. So you press Alt and up like so. And then in here, what I want to do is create a constant. So this constant will be filter the contact. And what I'm going to do is create a function for this, which is an await function. So in this block here, we also need to make this block async. And in here, I'm going to await for a function that is called handle contact info. So we need to create this function. And in here, what I'm going to do is pass in the chat, which essentially is document data or undefined. So what I'm going to do is copy this. So pass in the chat. And I also want to pass in the params.id. So that is at the top here. So let's pass that in as an argument. So now what we need to do is create this handle contact info function. So let's go ahead and do that. So what I want to do is in my main screen components, I'm going to create a helper file in here so we can get the logic out in a separate place so the component is more lightweight. So helper.ts like so. And then the function is export const handle contact info, which again is an async function. So it takes in the data that I had. So I can paste that in now, which is the chat data. And then also the second argument is going to be the chat ID. So chat ID is going to be a string in here. So now what we need to do is import document data from Firebase. And I just want to close this function off in here. So now what I want to do is log out a comment saying that check if the current user is the same as the chat ID. And if that's the case, what we want to do is get the other user's details, because we don't want to show the current user's details in the chat. So if that's the case, then get the other user's details. And then the else block would be get the opposite user's details. So let's handle this. So first of all, we want to do an if check, and the if check is going to be get access to the current user. So auth from Firebase dot current user dot UID is equal to chat ID. If it is equal to the chat ID, what we need to do is we want to get the other user's details. So I'm going to declare a constant in here. So const other user, so we can tab this. So other users chat.messages. So if you remember going back to when we was declaring the message object in the chats collection, we had a comment in there. So if you just go back into the message controller, in here, we have a comment saying this is only used for the first index of the array. So essentially, we want to get the recipient details. So when I send the message for the first time, what happens is I'm sending a message to a new user, and the chat populates based on the user ID, so the user's UID, and then that gets added to the params object in the URL. So what I need to do is get access to the first index of this message array. So in my helper.ts file, I want to go on to chat.messages.message, because we have a message within the messages. And then we want to get access to the first message. And this time, what we want to do is get access to the message sender ID. So that is the other user's ID there. And then I just want to delete this. So now that we've got the message sender ID, that's not enough, because we still need more information. So we essentially need the entire user object. So we want to get a single user from that. So we've already defined the function in our user controller, which is get single user from Firestore. So all I want to do is go back in my helper, and then I want to just do a constant again of get other participant, which is equal to await, and then we want to paste in our get single user from Firestore and pass in the other user as the argument in here. And now that should work. So all we now need to do is return the get the other participant in this block. So if we save, so if auth.currentUser.uid is equal to the chat ID, then we want to essentially get the message sender ID. But if it's not, then we just want to do the opposite. So essentially what we could do is copy this block in here and paste that in. But instead of the message sender ID this time, what we want to do, the only difference is the message recipient ID, because it's the opposite, because this time the auth.currentUser.uid is not equal to the chat ID. So essentially we want to get the first message in the chat, and we want to pass in that message recipient ID in there, and then we want to fetch the single user, and then we want to return the other participant in here. So essentially it's the same function, but it's just checking and it's returning the same value in here. Now there are ways to refactor this, but to keep things simple, I'm just going to keep it as it is for now, and then that will help you understand how to get the other user from the Firestore database in here. So going back into main screen header, we now need to import this function, and now we have the dot then, which returns the filtered contact, and then we are console logging the chat. But what we can do is console log the filtered contact just to see if we get the other user's details. So now if I save this, and now all I need to do is check my browser, and I want to see if I'm getting the other user's details. So if I just refresh the page, as you can see here, something is not working. It's saying undefined in filter contact. So let's go ahead and debug what's going on. So if we go into here and the filter contact isn't working, because what happens is initially when the page loads, it's undefined because this is a promise. So essentially we need to wait for the promise to resolve. So what I'm going to do is create a piece of state and then set that piece of state into the filtered contact in here. So let's go ahead and do that. So in our component at the top, I'm going to create a const called user or contact info, and initially it's going to be null. So once we filter the contact in here, what I want to do is set contact info to the filtered contact, and then all I want to do now is after this use effect, console log the contact info, so the piece of state where the contact info lies. So at the minute it's of type any, so the type will be null, or the type will be the contact info, which is an object. So if we hover over this, as you can see here, it's going to be document data or undefined. So let's just copy that and add that in to here. And we also need to import document data from Firebase once again. So now if I save all of this, it should resolve and it will be undefined and then resolve to the contact info. So the filtered contact that we have in here. So now in my browser, what I want to do is refresh the page. So the error comes because the UID coming from the Firebase user here is not the same as the recipient ID over here because we hard coded this and we manually typed it in. So what we essentially need to do is delete the chat and start again, and then that way the recipient ID and the sender ID would be correct. So what I'm going to do now is shift sideways from this, and where we have this icon here, when we click on it, I'm going to delete the chat from the Firestore database. So essentially what that will do is delete this document in our chats collection. So what I now need to do is create a delete chat function, which is quite simple to do. So where I would put my delete chat function is in the message controller. So in here at the bottom, I'm going to create a new function. So export const of delete chat, which essentially what that's going to do is take in a chat ID, and it's also going to take a router object, because what happens is when we delete a chat, we want to navigate to the home page again. So router, and at the minute it's going to be any, but I believe that will be an app router instance. So we can update this ourselves like so. And then in here, we just need to close the function off. So there's a few things we need to do. So get access to the chat first of all. So const chat ref, which essentially is the same as what we've done above here, which takes in the Firestore and then accesses the chats collection and then accesses the document relevant to the chat ID. Then what we want to do is, instead of a set doc, there's something called a delete doc. So await delete doc, that comes from Firestore as well. So we just need to import that in, place control space and then import. And then all I want to do is console.log, the chat has been deleted, and also router.push back to the home page. So essentially that is the delete chat from Firestore function complete. So what I want to do is get access to the icon, which is essentially this delete icon over here. So let's go ahead in our code into our main screen header and find the icon, which essentially is the delete icon on here. And on the icon button which surrounds it, I'm just going to add a non-click, which is equal to delete chat from Firestore, and we need to pass in some arguments. So pass in a callback in here. So what I essentially want to pass in is the params ID, which we have access to up here. So I can paste that in just here. And then we also need the router. So I need to import that in at the top using the use router. So let's go after params const router is equal to use router like so, and import that in from next navigation. So if I now save all, we should have the delete functionality working on the application. So just to double check the Firestore database, we now have one chat in here, which is an array of a few objects of messages. And if I click onto here, this URL should navigate to the home page, and then the chat should delete from this document here as well. So let's press this. And if we go down, you can see here, there's an error here, which is delete chat from Firestore is not defined. So what we need to do is import it in, which we haven't done, and save everything now so that it should work. And now if we press delete, essentially what has happened is we have been navigated back to the home page. So what we need to do is check to see if that chat still exists, which it hasn't now. So it's gone and it's been deleted. So that's fine. So what we now need to do is, going back to what we had previously, is create a new chat. So let's create the chat. We have access to a new chat in here. We now want to say hello Imran in here. Let's enter. And then now we should see this contact info populate. So in our code, we just need to refresh. And now you can see our contact info has been populated. So we're getting the other user's information. So now what we can do is use that and render out the UI in the header in here. So let's go ahead and do that. So now if we scroll up, you can see contact info is being rendered out. So we have that piece of state, which is essentially an object. So we can do a conditional check in here. So you can split this out as well, but I'm just going to keep it inside. So contact info in here, if that is true, what we want to do is, so if contact info is true, we want to do a conditional statement. So if it's true, we want to show the user avatar icon that we've defined previously. Otherwise, we want this as a fallback. And I'm just going to bring in a div here of how it should look. So if contact info is true, we want to get access to the user avatar reusable component that we made earlier. and then we just want to get access to the contact info.photo as the image, and the alt is the name. And then we also want the strong tag of email, but what I'll do is I'll just put in the name in here. So now if I just clean this up and save, so essentially what we should have is the information of the opposite user, so the other user in the app. So going into the browser, as you can see here now, the other user, so that's me logged in, and then this is the person I'm talking to, so this is my other email address in here. So that is all set up, and that is everything set on the headers. So we have the delete functionality working. We also have the sign out functionality working. So if I click on here, I should get signed out, and you can see here sign out from WhatsApp, and then I get redirected to the login page. So now what I need to do is sign back in, which again re-authenticates me and signs me back into the home page. And now we have that functionality working. The next step is we need to go into the chat. So if I go into this chat again, we have the user information populating. We now need to get access to the messages from this chat, so we will render that next. Okay, so what we've done previously is this header component here. So what we now need to do is similar approach, which is fetch the data from the Firestore database. But in this case, what we want to do for the messages is fetch the data in real time. So not the same way we've done it in the header, where we have the get single chat from Firestore. We still need to get the single chat from Firestore, but what I want to do is do it in real time. So again, this is going to be a client component. So let's go ahead and add use client in here. And most of the components are client side because we are using Firebase to fetch data. So in our component now, what I want to do is have a use effect in here that gets access to the snapshot. So I'll just bring in the code I have. So just this use effect, essentially it brings in the snapshot of the doc and then the params ID. And then what we want to do is close this use effect off and only refetch the data when the params ID changes for the new doc in here. So I'm just going to import the relevant dependencies. So essentially we're getting access to the document from Firestore in our chats collection, and then we want to get the chat that is relevant to the params ID. So we also need to define the params ID using use params in here. So now we also need to import the on snapshot from Firebase like so. And then in here, what I want to do is console log the doc.data. And then we also need to close this off here. So we now have a use effect that essentially runs in real time. So whenever the data changes in this document, then it will fetch the updated data. So for example, when we send a message, then the message will repopulate onto our chat component in here, so in our body. So let's save this. And I just want to console log the doc.data in our console. So if I just type in hello, press enter, you can see here a message is populated in here, which essentially adds the message of hello on the second index because we've already created the first one. Then I want to say welcome to my channel in here. I press enter, and now you can see it's repopulating and it's appending to the array. So now it's 3 and so on. So each time I send a message, when we render the messages in here, the message will populate as well. So let's go ahead and now populate the UI. But first of all, instead of console logging the data, we now need to create a piece of state so we can map through each message and create a reusable messages component. So in here, I'm going to create a piece of state called message list. So const of message list, or I'm going to call it data list actually, because this is our data. And set data list is equal to a use state of any for now. And actually what this data is going to be document data coming from Firebase. So document data, like so. And then instead of console logging doc.data in here, what I'm going to do is map through the data. So we just want the actual messages. So we can delete this. And then I'm going to create a message list. So const message list is equal to doc data dot messages dot message, because the message is the array that we need to get access to. And then all I want to do now is set the data list to the message list here. So now I just need to console log the data to see if the message array is being added into here. So if we go back into the browser, and you can see here we have an array of 3 objects, which is essentially our objects that we have created for all of our messages. So if I just added another one, as you can see, it's populating in real time, it's updating it, so the fourth message of hi has been added as well. So let's just add the UI in and create that now. So at the minute we're just rendering hello at the bottom. What we now need to do is map through this. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to create a new component, which is the messages component, which handles all of the messages inside here. So what we now need to do is in main screen, we are going to create a new file in here called messages.tsx, and this is going to handle all of our messages. So it will be tsrafe because we will be passing in some props into our component. So if I just delete this, and we will destructure the props. So at the minute it's just react.fc, and then I'm just going to pass in the props in here like so. So these are the messages, and in here what I also want to do is I've got access now to the data list, so I'm going to pass that in as a prop. So this will be data is equal to data list, like so. So we can map over each message in here. And then what I also want to pass in is the params.id. So the params ID is equal to params.id. So now what we now need to do is get access to the data list, which is the document data. And params ID is a string, so we just need to declare these types in messages. And I also need to import this. So type of props is data list, or data is equal to document data from Firebase, and then the params ID is a string like so. So now all we need to do is destructure the data and also destructure the param ID. Now that is all rendering correctly. And now what I want to do is, instead of the hello, it's rendering the messages, and we should see the messages text appear in the body. So let's go ahead and check. And as you can see there, you can see the messages being rendered into the body. So now let's go ahead and create the UI for this. So in here, I have a div, and in this div, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get access to my data. So data.map, and we need JSX curly brackets first of all, because we're using JSX in here. So data.map, so for each item and index, we want to implicitly return. So you use parentheses in here, and I want to have a div, and in this div it has a class name, and for now the class name is going to be flex with items of center, justify content of the end, so that will be justify end like so, padding x of 4 and a py of 2. So now that should be the message here. And what I also want to do is, as children, I want to pass in a few p tags in here, which is the message body and the created at, so the time. So if I just copy this, and it's going to be the item dot message body and item dot created at, and it has a bit of styling in here also. And then finally what I want to do is close this off with another parentheses. And now if I save, there is an error because we are missing a key prop, so we need to give this a key. So each item, what I'm going to give the key as is a unique identifier. And in this case, the unique identifier we can use is the index, which is what I'm going to be using. What you could also do is, instead we could create a message ID, which is a random string. So in our messages controller, when we create a new chat, we could add a message ID at the top within this array union, but I'm just going to keep it as it is, as an index. So in the messages, we are passing in a div that renders the message body and the created at time, so the time when it was created. So if I save all, and essentially what we should see is a list of 4 messages. So now we have an error in here. So what we now need to do is handle that, which essentially is the created at time. So I'm just going to comment this out just to see if that is the issue. And now you can see that as error has gone, and we are receiving messages in here. So now we just need to add the styling for it because the background should be white. So let's go ahead and add further styling in here. So on the surrounding div, what we now need to do is we need to have a different color for A, the recipient, and B, the sender. So we're going to have some conditional styling in here with Tailwind. So the way to do that is use curly brackets as it is a JSX expression, and you do the same surrounding as well. So now we can use JavaScript in the surrounding div here. And what I want to do is we get an access to the param ID first of all. So I'm going to do $, and in here we're going to add some logic. So first of all, we want to check if the item dot message sender ID is not equal to the param ID, If that is the case, then what we want to do is we want to render a margin left of auto. Otherwise, we just want to return null. So let's save that. So that is the first condition we need to have. But essentially, that is correct. So basically, I am the sender, so I should be on the right hand side, but the recipient's information should be on the left hand side. And then also, we need to do the same thing again. So what I'm going to do is just copy this, but do another check this time. But this time, what I want to do is, if it is equal to the param ID, I want to add the styling of BG of white. Otherwise, I want to have the background of BG green of 100. And then after that, what I want to do is this background needs to be rounded and large. So LG, and then it has a shadow, medium shadow, a margin of 2, and a max width of 50%. So it takes up the width of 50% as the max width. So max.w, and then for a percentage value, you use array brackets like that. And then you just put your percentage in here like so. So now if I save, what will happen is this should update in here. So what we need to do is, you can see the max width of the div now is 50%. So that is working correctly. And then one more thing we need to do is add wfit, which adjusts the text background so it fits within inside. So wfit, and now save. And now you can see the text has gotten more in line, but if it does stretch and if the text is quite long, then it goes to 50% of the screen there. So just to test the other hand, so if it's equal to, it'll go on to the left hand side, and if it's not equal to, it'll go into the white background. So let's just check that works as well. So now you can see it's white and it's on the left hand side as well. So we can just put it back to where we had it as previously in here. So now what I need to do in here is item.created dot, and we want to pass in the seconds because that was part of the object like so. So now if I go into the browser, you can see it in seconds, and because we used the function overload previously, we have access to the function called format date. So I'm just going to import that in. So format date, and then that should fix the date for us, which is coming from the app modal. So now if I save all, you can see the date is being fixed in here. Now you can see that the messages are appearing, and just to test that they are appearing, what I'm going to do is add another one saying hello again. And now you can see it's populated at the bottom, but we need to scroll, and I'm going to say one more time, press enter, and if I scroll, it is saying one more time. So what I now need to do is add in a auto scroll feature. So that's what we need to implement. So going back into our code, in the use effect, so if I go back up into message body, in here what I also want to do is have a function that's auto scrolls when a new message is added. So I'm just going to create a function in here called const scroll down the page like so, and let's just close this off. And what I'm going to do is pass in a ref object in here. So we need access to a use ref. So let's create that, which I will do just above, which is const last message ref, and that's going to be use ref of null. So I'm just going to create an empty div at the bottom. So underneath messages, and that is going to be div with a ref of last message ref. And then if I hover over this ref here, you can see it's of type HTML div element. So what I'm going to do is copy this last message ref, and this is the argument that is going to be received in here. So we can just pass that in. And then what I want to do is get access to the ref. So essentially ref.current.scroll into view, and we have behavior smooth. But I want to expand on this a little bit more. So what you can do with TypeScript is if we command and click into scroll into view, you have a few options. So this is a boolean, it has scroll into view option. So let's go ahead and check them out, which is block and inline. So I'm going to add them in. So block is going to be the start, and then the inline is going to be the nearest. So let's just bring that in. So that's handy with TypeScript. We can just check the documentation that way. So now that is the function there set. So what I want to do is after the snapshot, I want to scroll down to page in here and pass in the last message ref here like so. So now if I save and if I type in a message now, so it's me, and press enter, it's not scrolling yet because what's happening is the on snapshot is working first and then the it's me happens. So essentially they're happening at the same time. What we now need to do is add a little delay in here. So the way you can add a delay in here is with a set timeout, and instead of 1,000 seconds, what I'm going to do is reduce this down significantly into 10, because it only needs to happen slightly after. Now all we need to do is, with this timeout, we just need to move it into this on snapshot so it happens at the same time, but just a slight bit after we set the data list. So let's save now. So it's compiled, and what I need to do now is refresh the page. So as you saw there was a little delay and then the scroll happened. So I'm just going to type in, "Hey Imran," and then when I press enter now, it will add the message to the Firestore database, and then it will scroll down slowly so you can see it when I press enter, and you saw it there, and hi, and you've seen it there again. So that's the whole main section complete now. The only thing left to do in this app for the messages is the sidebar. We need to populate the list of all of the chats in this sidebar above here. So we will do that next. So the only thing left to do now is add our chats that we create to the sidebar here, so we know what chats are open. So going back into our code, all we need to do is close everything off in here. And then on our sidebar, so in the module of the sidebar, what I'm going to do is, before I map through the users that we are fetching from the API, I'm going to, in the same section, render a component in here called Firestore chats. And now we just need to create this component. So if I create this component in the sidebar in here, and it's going to be a new file called Firestore chats.tsx, and it's going to be RAFCE, and then again this is a react.fc. And in here, what I want to do is fetch all of the chats in real time. So instead of getting a single chat, we want to get all of the chats. So what I'm going to do is fetch it with a use effect with the onSnapshot method. So like we have done previously, what I'm just going to do is copy this and paste it in, because we've done this previously. So what I'll do is I'll run through it with you now. But essentially what we want to do is we want to fetch all the chats in real time with use effect. And on Snapshot, we get access to the chats collection, and then we map through each doc, and then we get the get snapshot doc, which is the helper function that we created before, which essentially is an object that has the ID of doc.id and spreads the doc.data. So that is in the user controller file. And then essentially we would get the message list and set it to the chats in here. So now we have access to the chats, which is all of the chats. So the caveat with the chats is you will get chats that you are not included in. So we need to filter them out as well. So we can do that in the UI. So let's go ahead and do that. So in here, what I want to do is, first of all, check if chat is true. So you do a double bang in here, and then we want to do and chats dot map, so an optional chain dot map. But before we map, actually, we need to filter. So let's filter first of all. And what we want to filter is for each chat, and the chat can be any for now, but we'll define the chat and fix that in a moment. So for each chat, which is essentially going to be the document data coming from Firebase, actually, we want to check to see if the chat dot messages. So now we're going through the objects and then accessing the messages. So chat dot messages dot message, which is the array dot sum. So now we're accessing the sum method. So if we hover over sum method, essentially it'll return a truthy value if some of the items, or at least one of the conditions, is true. So dot sum, and for each item in here, what I want to do is, again, this is going to be an item. I'm going to put in any for now, but we can define the type in a moment. So for each item in here, if the item message sender ID is equal to the auth.current-user.uid, or essentially the same condition, but what we now need to do is check for the message recipient ID, and then we also import this auth from here. Then we want to map over it. So let me just save this for now and go through it one more time. So we get access to the chats, then we go into the message array, and if any of the items meet these conditions, so if essentially the UID is equal to either the message sender ID or the recipient ID, then it's true. Then we can filter and map the rest of the chats in here. So what I can do now is do a dot map, and for each chat, which is essentially the document data, I want to implicitly return once again and add the closing parentheses also. And all I need to do now, because we've created a reusable chat component, which is what we did at the start of the build, we need to just pass in the chat, which is the key, and the key this time is going to be the index, which I will get access to, and then also the chat data we need to pass in is equal to the chat that we have here. So let's pass that in as well. And then the second argument of the map function is the index, so we can get that, which is essentially a number. So now we just need to close this off and import the chat component. And now if I save all, we now need to reconfigure the chat component. But first of all, what I want to do is declare this type in here. So this type is going to be called the chat message type. So let's go into the type.d.ts file, and I'm going to create the chat message type, which is essentially, I'll bring in the code now for the type, and essentially it's the message body created at message sender ID, recipient, and photo URL and type. So let's go ahead and again paste in the chat message type as the item in here. So now all we need to do is we need to receive chat data as props in the chat component. So let's go into the chat component, and in here we just need to receive the chat data. So now either data or chat data is optional because we are handling two sets of data. All I want to do now is handle the different UIs. So if I go into here, and first thing I want to do is console.log the chat data that we're receiving just to see what that returns. And then if I save all, we have some errors on the chat sidebar, which is essentially we need to import the Firestore chats now. So that should fix that. And then in the chat component here, we have an error on source, which is type of undefined is not assignable to string. So we'll deal with that in a moment. But first of all, what I want to do is check the chat data. And now if you go into the Firestore chat, we need to add the use client in here. And the reason we need the use client is because we've added this use effect in here. So essentially, if we use React hooks, it's a client component then. So let's go into the browser now. And as you can see in the browser, a message is being added in here, and that's coming from the Firestore chat. So we just need to handle the image, the message, and the timing here. So let's go ahead and handle that. So if I go into the chat, and in here, what we need to do is, because we're getting chat data, we need to handle, if it is chat data, then we need to render a certain image. And if it is the data, then we need to handle that as well. So what I'm going to do now is create a piece of state in here. So const of info and set info is equal to react.useState of an empty array. And then this array will be of type document data, and that's coming from Firebase. So now what we need to do is handle the chat data now. Whenever chat data comes in, we need to do something different and then render the UI. So what I'm going to do is bring in some code. Okay, so essentially what happens is we have a piece of use state which sets the chat info. When the page loads or when the component loads, we have this filter contact function that invokes, and then it has a dot then which returns a response, which then we set to set chat info. And then also we have a dependency in here, which is filter contact. So essentially what we want to do is filter the contact based on the chat info. So similar to how we did it with the header on the main screen header, where we want to get the opposite user's details, we did create this reusable function, which is the handle contact info, passing in the data and then the URL link. So in our case, we could get access to the chat data.link. And this is a memoized function, meaning that it won't re-render when the component mounts again. What we want to do is we want to cache the data and memoize it, and we only want to revalidate the data when the chat data from the props changes. So that makes it more performant in React. And then what we do is we pass that filtered contact in here in the use effect as a dependency. So what I want to do now is just console.log the chat info that we are receiving in here, and it's essentially an object. So if I save all, we should get the chat info for only the chats that I have created as an authenticated user. So only the chats for myself. So in here, I have chat info, and I only have one chat open, which is essentially this one with myself on my other email address here. So again, it reflects that here in the UI. So there's only one chat here. So we just need to conditionally render the relevant information now. And chat info is now an object. So going into here, in source, what we could do is we could have the nullish coalescing operator, which essentially is if the left hand side is true, then it won't go to the right hand side. But if the left hand side is false, it will go to the right hand side. So let me show you in action what that is. So chat info dot photo. That's what we're getting in the object for chat info. And then you can do question mark like so. Otherwise, it's data.image. So the source is going to be either chat info.photo. So that means if this whole section is true, so if chat data is passed in, then we want to handle all of it in here, and then we want to show chat info.photo. But if chat info or chat data is not passed in as a prop, then we just want to use the data that we receive from the API and render that in here as an image. You can do the same for the alt, but we'll just keep it as the user because that's what the user is. The second part is going to be the p tag. So I'm just going to render the names. Instead of the first name, it's going to be chatinfo.name. Otherwise, if that's not true, then we want to do data.firstname. And then for the text, what I want to do is add a bit of text in here, but again, we want to this time do the nullish coalescing operator. And on the left hand side, we want to access chat data.messages.message.slice. So essentially what we are doing is we're getting the last message in the array. And this is the way to do that. And we want to get the message body for that. Otherwise, we just want to render this is the last message. And then finally, we just want to do the same thing for the time. So if I just paste it in here, we want to get the created at time in here. And what we also want to do is dot seconds. And then we need to wrap this in the format date function in here like so. And what I would suggest is also try to refactor this code so it's more simple and easier to understand, because at the minute it is quite large. It's getting quite large anyway. So I would always encourage to refactor it. So that is all complete. So all I'm going to do is save. And let's see if that works in the browser now. So now, as you can see here, it's all working correctly. And the last message I sent was hi, which is correct. The icon is the same here as it is here. The name is the same as well. And the last message and the time are the exact same as you can see there. So you can handle that UI. You just need to give it a justify icon, enough space in between there. But I'm just going to leave it as it is. So all I want to do now is add a link when I click onto there. So if I go into the home page, at the minute, if I click here, nothing is happening. So what I want to do now is go through the chat. But at the minute, when I click on it, nothing happens. So if we go back into our code once again, and in Firestore chats, when I'm mapping through the data, what I could do here is add a link tag. Essentially, it's just wrapping in a link tag from Next.js. And I just need to import this in. And I can delete this key now because the parent is different. The parent is the link. But when I click on it, I want to go to /chat/chat.link, which is essentially the link for the chat ID. So now if I save and go into the browser, what I now want to do is click here, and then I should navigate to /chat/the ID. So let's check if that works. So as you can see, it's navigating there. So now what I can do is I can log in as this user on my browser and add some messages in here, and they should appear on this side here. So let's give it a try. Okay, so now that I've added the messages in here, you can see that the messages are working. So I'm just going to type in further. You can see my messages are on the right, and then the recipient messages are on the left. So that is the messages complete now. We have a full working app in here. So what we're going to do next is look at Firebase storage and see how we can upload images. So when we click here, we want to attach an icon or an image, and then we want to upload it into our storage bucket, and then we should be able to see the image being rendered in the UI as well. So that's what we'll be looking at next. So when a user wants to upload something in our chat here, what we can do is when we click this attach icon, we want a modal to appear similar to this modal here where we have all of the contacts, and we have already created a reusable modal. So what we now need to do is when we click here, open a new modal, and then in there we want to upload a file to Firestore storage. So let's go ahead and configure that first of all. So in our cloud Firestore, we have our chats and our users collections. So that's working fine. If we go into the build drop down in here, we have this one, which is storage, which we need to set up. So all we do is click get started in here, and we just want to start in test mode for now. And then we've already selected our location. So all we do is click done. So now that is creating a default bucket for us. So this is where we can store all of our storage files. So in our case, we will have only images that we want to upload in this chat. So whilst that's being set up, what I want to do is go into our application in here, and then where we have the sidebar header in the common components in here, click sidebar header and index in there. we are rendering an app modal component. So I'm just going to copy this, and where we want to access the files is in the attach icon here. So what we want to do is go into the message input component, which is in the main screen section, and where we have the attach file icon, what I want to do is paste in the app modal component, and instead of the chat outline icon, we just want the attach file icon in here, and we just need to import the app modal component as well. And what I want to change the title is to upload image, and then the modal type is going to be either of type chat, or if we go into icon modal type. So if we go into the app modal, icon modal type, and then that could be either upload or chat. So we want to have the type as upload, because then what will happen is that will render a different component. So in app modal now, if I open this up and we scroll down, we have a function that handles the modal children. So if we go into this function, and then if the case of modal type is upload, it will render the upload modal. So let's go into the upload modal now. And here you can see it says this is the upload modal. So now all I need to do is save all. And if I go back into my browser, we have the chat modal, which handles the contacts in here. But now we have the upload modal, which handles the upload image. This is the upload modal, and we have duplicated the icon. So let's remove the other icon in message import, which is this one. So now if I save, I don't need the message import anymore. So I can close this one down, and I can also close this helper down as well, because we are rendering this is the upload modal, and this is what we need to focus on for now. So we need to configure some UI in here, but essentially what we are going to be using is Material UI to render the items in here. But first of all, what we want to have is a piece of state. So piece of state is essentially the file that we want. So const file and set file, which is equal to use state, and it's null initially. So the file is going to be of type file, which is essentially a file type that we have coming from JavaScript. And then we want an outer div. So the outer div will have a class name, and in this outer div we will have a margin top of 4. It will be flex, and then flex of column. So display flex, flex direction column, and a gap or 2 between the items. Then we want an inner div, and this div will have a class name also. And in this class name, we will have display of flex once again, items of center, and then we also want a gap of 2 in here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to render a Material UI button. So in this div, we have the button coming from Material UI, like so. And in this button, we're going to have the text of upload. And now if I save, we just need to check the modal, and I'm going to delete this as well. So now when I click on here, we have a modal appear here saying upload. So what I want to do, when I click here, I want the upload modal to appear. So let's configure that now. What I also want to do is add a submit button in as well. So I'm just going to copy this, paste this underneath, but the variant this time is going to be contained, and this time it will be submit. So this button is an upload, and this one is a submit. So with the upload, essentially what we are doing is we're going to set the file to whatever we upload as the image, and then the button is going to submit this information to the Firestore storage. So if I save this, the first thing I want to do in the button is have an input inside, and this input is going to be of type file, and this input is going to be hidden. So you can have an option of hidden on the input, and it will accept any type of image. So image slash, and then you put an asterisk or star at the end. And I'm going to put in multiple, so you can have the option, and that should be fine. What we also need to do is update the state. So this is the state we have here. We need to update the state when the input changes. So when it accepts an image. So after multiple, what I want to do is have an onChange event in here. And this is going to be an event. So first of all, we're going to have the E, which is the event. And in the event, we're going to do a few checks in here. First one is going to be a guard clause. So if there is e.target.files is equal to null. So if e.target.files is triple equal to null, then we just want to return. Otherwise, what I want to do is set the file to e.target.files, and we want the first index in here like so. So initially the file is null, when we upload an image, then it will on change, and then we will set the file to whatever it is in e.target.files of the first index. So now let me just save that so it formats it a little bit better. That is the upload section complete. What I also want to do is after the button is render some UI. So the UI is going to be if file is not equal to null, and that is true, then I want to show a span, and in that span I want to get access to the file.name. So this is the name of the file that I am uploading. That's the first thing I want to do. And then I want to add a close icon as well underneath, which essentially is icon coming from Material UI. So I'm just going to implement that at the top. So therefore we need to have this component as a use client now. So the close icon is being imported in, and this is now a React fragment. We need to put this in because we have two children. We can only have one. So essentially this close icon has some styling to it, but when we click on it, it sets the file back to null. And then we need to handle the else statement, which is otherwise return null. So now if I save, I want to check what the model shows, and I also want to console what the file is. So let me console log file just to see if we are updating everything and if the functionality we have implemented here is correct. So now we have file as null. So when I click upload, just do this React one, press open. So now we have a file being added to the state of file, as you can see here, and we are setting the name as the file.name. If I press close, what happens is it sets it back to null. So that is all working correctly. Now what we need to do is when we press submit, we need to send this information to our Firestore storage over here. So let's go ahead and do that. So what I'm going to do with this button here is I'm going to set it to disabled if the file is equal to null. So we can't submit anything if the file is equal to null, and that is the file state is equal to null. And then I also want to have an on click on this button, which essentially handles the submitting of the information and the storage. So in here, we're going to have a callback, and I'm going to pass in a function called handle upload. So we need to create this function now. So this function, I'm going to handle this in a storage file. So that is going to be in the lib folder in Firebase. So let's create that now. But first, what I'm going to do is pass in a few arguments in here that we will need for this handle upload, which is the params.id, the set file, which is the setter here, because we need to reset it back to null again. We want the handle close because we want to close the modal. And we also need the file because when we submit something, we need the file information, and then also the URL, so the params ID. So at the top here, we need to get access to the params again. So const params is equal to use params, and we need to import that in as well. So now what I need to do is in Firebase, I'm going to create all of my storage helpers. So I'm going to create a new file in here called storage.ts. And in here, I'm going to create the function. So it's export const handle upload, which essentially is a async function. And then we have our arguments, and I've already predefined the type. So just paste them in here and save. So essentially we get params ID, which is a string, set file, which is a dispatch set state action of file or null, handle close, which closes the modal, and then file, which is equal to file or null. So in here now, what I'm going to do is, because it's an async function, I'm going to do a try catch block. So try, and then after here, we want to do a catch. And then also we want to do a finally, because this finally block will happen every time, no matter what the outcome. So we want to do that. And first of all, what we want to do is finally, we want to set file to null and handle close always. So that's very important. What I also want to do in my try block is do a few console logs. So first one is uploading, got it here. Second one I want to do is console log the file because I want to know if the file is coming through. Third one, I don't need to do a console log, but I need to do some defensive programming, which means we do a guard close. So if there's no file, then we want to return, so don't do anything. Otherwise, we want to do await upload image, which takes in two arguments, which is the file and also the params ID. So I need to create this function now, which is essentially handling the upload of the image. So that section is complete. And then all we need to do is for the catch, handle the error. So console.error of error message like so. So just before the handle upload, I'm going to create a new function. So export const upload image. and this is where we need to take in the file and the params ID, and this function is essentially handling the image upload in each single step. So the first step, what we want to do is we want to format a date for the image name. So let's create that. So const formatted date is equal to the format date, which is the function that I created earlier using TypeScript overload of new date. So we've got the formatted date, and then we want to get the file name, so the name as it appears on the storage bucket. So const file name is equal to, and I'm just going to bring in the name that I want to call it as. So essentially, it's going to be the params ID / the formatted date here .jpeg, or you could call it .png or whatever you wish. Then I'm going to console log the file name. Essentially, the file name is a pointer to the file in the storage bucket in the cloud, and it's also lightweight as well. It says it in the Firebase docs. So that is that step done. Now we need to have the storage ref, so get reference to the storage ref. So const storage ref is equal to ref, which essentially is from Firebase v9, and inside we have the storage and the file name. So the storage we need to define now. So let's go ahead in our index file in Firebase here, and we want to do const storage is equal to get storage. So now we have synced that part up. We need to import this get storage now from Firebase storage. So I'll just import this at the top, and then all I need to do is export this. So this is the benefit of using Firebase, is you can add and replace functionality wherever you want, and then you have a central point where you can use the enhancements or services or whatever it is you need. So in here now, all I need to do is import storage from the index file, and I also need to import ref from Firebase storage. So now we have access to the storage ref. I can also console log the storage ref if I need to, but what I now need to do is upload the file to the storage bucket. So I'm just going to add that in as a comment. And now all I need to do is await upload bytes, which comes from Firebase storage, passing in the storage ref and also the file, which is coming from here. And then once that is done, we can then chain a dot then onto this upload byte with a snapshot. And then we can also console log whatever we've uploaded. So uploaded a global file with the snapshot. And then finally, what I also want to do is just simply return the file name if I need it for anything. So that's that section complete. And then now this upload image function is handled up here, which essentially handles all of the functionality for the uploading of the image. So if I go back into upload modal and I need to do control space and import this in, that is the upload of the image complete. So now what we need to do is test this out to see if it uploads into the storage bucket. So in our application, again, what I'm going to do is upload an image. So upload, then we can select our image that we want and press open. It's saying the name that I need in here. And then now what I want to do is press submit. But first of all, when I press it, all of the console logs that we have made, they should log out here in the console. So if I press submit, as you can see, we have logged the console saying uploading started, the file that we are uploading. We've got the file name now. And then finally, we've successfully uploaded the global file. And this is the metadata which is being sent to the storage bucket in Firestore storage. And as you can see here, we have a full path of the image we have in here. So now all we need to do is verify that it worked. So if I go into my cloud Firestore, and in here, we should see an image populate. So if I go into rules and then back into files, as you can see, this document has been created for the storage reference, which is essentially ending in CB. So this is relevant to this chat in here. This is where I've added it. So all I now need to do is if I click into it and I click on the image has now been uploaded and we have all the metadata in here. So what I'm going to do next is fetch this image or all of the images in the application and then render them on the client side onto our chat component in here. Okay, so now that we've uploaded the images, what we now need to do is download them. So in here, we have one image that we have uploaded and we would just want to download it into our components or the message body component. So in our code, what I want to do is if I go into the message body, we are rendering the messages in here. So what we could do is either add the image into the messages array in here and then combine the data and do it that way, or we could just create a separate images component underneath. So what I'm going to do here is is create the download images component. So if I call this images, and then what you can do is you can combine them and then sort them into your own array of data. But for now, I'll just keep it as simple as possible. So images, and then if I go into the main screen, I'm going to create a new file in here called images.tsx. So what I actually will do is call it storage images, just to make sure it doesn't confuse anyone. And then RAFCE in here, and this is going to be a React functional component. And what I'm going to do is just render, this is where we render images, and all I want to do now is import this in the message body here. So control space and storage images is in there, and now all I need to do is save all. And in our application, you can see this is where we render images like so. So that's fine. What I also want to do now is start creating the functionality for this. So let's go into our storage image component, which is in here, and I'm going to create a few functions. So you could either create these functions in the storage file, so in the lib Firebase storage, or you could create them in here. It's up to you. What I'm going to do is add them in the lib Firebase storage file, and this is also going to be a use client component because we will be using use effect in here. So I'm just going to bring in the use effect, which essentially is to handle the data or the images in our case. And we also need to create this function. So const handle data is just going to be an empty function for now, like so. So now if I save, I just need to import use effect from React, and then the handle data is going to be the function name. So now that should all be fine and working correctly. And what I want to do with handle data is I want to make this an async function because we are going to be awaiting some data coming back when we fetch the data. So let's delete this console log, and I'm going to do await, and the function name is going to be called fetch images, and that is going to be defined in our storage file. So fetch images, essentially I'm going to pass in a few arguments that we need to create. So first argument is going to be something called a list ref. Second one is going to be set images, and then the third one is going to be some data. And fetch images is going to take in two arguments. First one is going to be something called a list ref, and then the second argument is going to be set images, like so. So we need to create the use state for set images, which I will do just before here. And we also need to import the use state, and also the image type we need to define. So I'm just going to define that in types.d.ts, and essentially the images type is a photo URL created at type of string, and then also the message sender ID because we need that. So let me just import that in. And then handle data says makes the dependencies of the use effect hook, move it inside the use effect, or wrap it in its own use callback. So what we'll do is wrap it in its own use callback hook. So this memoizes the function and only re-renders the function when the dependencies change. So in our case, it will be the list ref, but we've not defined it yet, so we don't know what that is. And we also don't know what the fetch images is. So what the list ref is a storage reference in our storage bucket. So let's create that now. So the list ref is the ref coming from Firebase storage, like so. And what I want to do is get access to our storage and then the param.id. So when we go into our storage bucket, this param ID here is essentially what we want to use, and this is what we use to create the file name. So it's the same folder structure in here. So going back into the code, we want to import storage from our lib Firebase here, and then we also want to get access to the params ID. So let me just again get access to params is equal to use params, which is being used quite a lot in this build because everything is reliant on the params. And then the second argument is a string of params.id in here. So that is the list ref complete, and then we also need to import the use callback. And now if I save, the only thing missing now is the fetch images function. So we need to define this function, and I'll do that in the storage. So let's navigate to there now and scroll all the way to the bottom, and I'm going to create the function. So export const of fetch images. So this one is an async function, and it takes in the list ref, which is a storage reference, and the set images, which is a React state hook. So let me just import storage reference and also the image type in here, and then we also need to close this off. And now we have our function defined. We need to do some checks in this function now. So what we want to do is find all of the items in the storage bucket. So find all of prefix and items, or you could do find all items. You essentially get access to the prefixes and the item, but what we want to do is get access to the items. So now, because this is an async function, what we want to do is there's a hook from Firebase storage which is called list all. So we want to await, and we want to list all. We need to import this from Firebase, which takes in an argument of the reference or the storage reference. So in our case, that's the list ref, and then then we get a response. And in that response, what we get back is a response.items. But I want to essentially create an images array constant also. So let's create that first of all. So in here, what I want to do is const of images array. So this is where I want to add all of the images into, is equal to images type. And at the minute it's an empty array, so we'll just keep it as that for now. And then what we want to do is get access to all of the items in the response. So res.items for each. And in here, what I want to do is get access to all of the items on the list ref, which is correct. So if we just delete this, and what we want to do now is create an image URL. So this is where we need to have a new function called get download URL. So this is going to be called const image URL. So what essentially we have done is we have mapped through all of the items, which what I will actually do is console log this first of all. And the item ref in here essentially is going to be a type of storage reference. So item ref will be storage reference, and that comes from Firebase storage. And we also need to close this off here. So that is all fine. And let me just quickly save this, and we need to handle the fetch images. So let's console log the item ref in here. So at the minute, we should only just get the one image that is saved in our storage bucket. But if there was more, then they would fetch the multiple in there. So let's go and see our console, and we just need to refresh the page as well. So we are getting some errors saying fetch images is not defined. So we need to go into our storage images and import this in, and then we can test it out. So now, as you can see, the item ref is a storage reference in our storage from Firebase. And in here, we have access to a full path. We have the name, which essentially is the name that we give the item. So the name is, we are extracting the last part of the name out. So 1148.jpg, which is essentially the same name in here. So 1148.jpg. And that's the item ref being received as an object. So we just need to render that out. But if we just finish off fetching the image, so fetch images, at the minute, we're just getting the name, but we need the download URL, the full URL path. So let's go ahead and do that now. So in here, put a comment saying get the download URL, which is the full URL path, the image. And then what I'm going to do is underneath create a constant called image URL is equal to await. So essentially we need to put this in an async here, and then await of get storage download URL. So this is the name I'm calling my function, because Firebase has its own function called get download URL, which is what we actually need. So get storage download URL in here, and what we pass in here is the item ref. So now what we need to do is define the get storage down URL as a function. So let's go ahead and do that. So export const, and we do that before, because we are using arrow functions, we need to declare it before, because we don't have the hoisting capability of a normal function. So if you did export function with the name, then it hoists up to the top levels, therefore it's accessible within the fetch images function. But I'm just declaring it before because I prefer the arrow function. So what we need to do now is create this function. So if we copy this, get export const get storage download URL, and this takes in a file name as the argument. And what I will actually do is create this as a normal function. So export async function, just to show you the variety actually. Get storage download URL, which takes in a file name, or you could call it a storage ref. And then the URL essentially is the get download URL, and we need to import this from Firebase. So I'll just import this in at the top. So it's get download URL from Firebase storage, and we are using that here. And what we also need to do is await get download URL and pass in the file name as the argument in here. And then that's uploaded at the top, and then we just return the URL here. So now we have the image URL. If I just console log the image URL this time to see if we're receiving that. So let's delete this one now and save. Now we should be getting the full URL path of the image URL. So if we refresh the page. So now, as you can see, we have the full image URL in here being rendered equal to the image URL. So let's just check if that's actually working. So we can actually click on it, and it opens up the image that we have in our Firestore storage. So if we go into here, that is the exact same image that we have being rendered in our storage here in our bucket. So now what we need to do is just render it out, but let's finish the function first of all. So we have access to the image URL. That's the first step. So now I want to create an object called images data. So let's just bring that in, and I'm going to remove this console log. So images data is going to be this object that has a photo URL, a created at, a type which is equal to storage, a message sender ID which is whoever is sending it, so it'll be the current user. So let's get access to auth.currentUser.uid, and then the photo URL is essentially the image URL that we have defined here. The created at is the name that we looked at earlier on, and we're just splitting it so that we get everything before the full stop, so not the .jpeg, just the name itself and the time. And then the type is storage here. So now what I want to do is I want to add the images array here and push the images data into the images array like so. And then finally, we're getting access to these set images. So we just need to update that to the images array in here. So now that is all complete. What I now want to do is go back into my storage images.tsx file. In here, we just want to console log the images. So let's go ahead and do that. See the image being returned, and it should be an object that is included within an array. So let's save all. And now, as you can see here, the images are being rendered in the component here. So we have an array that contains objects of images, and there's a lot of re-rendering happening in here. So let's just fix that as well. So the re-rendering is happening all the time. So what I'm going to do is delete this because we don't need the handle data being rerun whenever it changes. We only need to handle the data when this component re-renders, so this storage image re-renders. So now all I can do is disable this. So quickly disable this, and then now if I save, this should now fix the issue. So now when I type in a new message saying, hey, as you can see, the image gets fetched again, and that updates as well. So that is the images being rendered. So now the only thing left to do is render the image onto the page. So we can just copy the message component UI. So if we go into here, essentially what we can do is copy the divs, which essentially what it is. So copy the div in here and go into our return block and just render the div first of all. And we need to map through the images as well. So images.map for each item in the image, we want to implicitly return the div. So let's move this div up in here like so. And instead of the p tag, what we want to do is we want to have the image be rendered inside. So let's go ahead and do that, which is essentially a div inside, and the div contains an image from next image. And for each item in here, the source is going to be the item.photo URL. So now all I need to do is access the param ID once more on this page. So it'll be params.id. So this is determining whether the styling of the image is on the left or the right side of the page. So if I now save, we now have slight issues that we need to fix. So let's go ahead and fix them. So in our return block, what we want to do is have a surrounding React fragment around everything in here before we map over it like so. So now if I save, that should fix everything here. And now one final thing to do is we need to just check to see if the image is being rendered onto the page. So let's go ahead and do that. So instead of this is where we render the images, now what will happen is the image should render. So now this is a good sign, because what's happening is we're using the next image component, and now we need to update the hostname in our next config.js file. So let's go ahead and do that. So in our next config.js, just add another URL of Firebase storage.googleapis.com, which means that we're getting an image from Firebase storage. So when we make a change to our next config, we need to restart the server again. And now all we do is refresh the page. And now, as you can see, we have our image being rendered onto the page as well. So now what you can do is you can combine both components that we have in our message body. So that is the messages and storage images, and you can combine them into one component, and therefore combining the data sets for the data in the data list, i.e. all of the messages, and the storage images, so the images array as well, putting it into one data array, and then you can kind of sort it by the timestamp or the created at, which is what we have created. But anyway, that is everything complete in this application. We have covered quite a lot. So we have covered Firebase login and authentication. We have covered Next.js 13. We have managed to create our Firestore database and along with the Firestore storage as well, all using TailwindUI and many other features that we have gone through in this application, along with TypeScript as well. I hope you enjoyed this build. I also have ebooks available on my website that I have created. There are 3 at the minute that I have that hopefully will help you improve and become a better front-end developer in general. I cover a range of topics in them ebooks, and there's more information on my website and the link is below. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this build and learnt a lot from it, or at least something from it, and please like and subscribe, and I will look forward to seeing you in the next one.